Henry didn't wait long. Whatever meeting Tom had going wrapped as soon as Henry sat down. Maybe they were already deep in it when he walked in. His laggy super hearing only snagged a fragment. Just find a target quickly. He could have rewound the room, pulled the sound off the walls, and rebuilt the whole conversation. He didn't bother. He wasn't here to play spy. Unless it was scandal-level gossip, he tuned out. The door opened. Two men stepped out, nodded at Tom, and headed for the exit. Henry didn't stare. He glanced up like any guy in a waiting room, then went back to his magazine. Still, he clocked the details. Both wore the same pinched look, like the world owed them a refund. One let his gaze linger on Henry a beat too long, trying to fix the face. Henry kept his eyes on the page. His senses took the photo for him. Then the weird part. The man's eyelid slid open the wrong way, a quick sideways blink. Henry didn't twitch. Inside, he filed it. Another mutant. Great. This world really was an X-gene convention. About time, Tom called from the office. Get in here. Henry set the magazine down and went in. Tom cleared two empty glasses, handed him coffee, and pointed at a chair. No point checking if it was still warm. This wasn't a hotel lobby. Henry sat. Tom pulled a thick manila envelope from a drawer and slid it over. All in there. Look it over. If something's off, say so. Henry spread the contents out. Lots of documents. The passport looked familiar in layout, if not color. The rest looked like alphabet soup. Tom smirked, sorted the stacks, and narrated. Passport, obviously. This is your social security card. Birth certificate makes you a full citizen. Congratulations. He tapped another set. Taxes. You have a legal identity now, which means the government wants a taste. Hire a CPA unless you enjoy audits. He sipped his coffee. Don't blow your cash. The IRS won't shoot you, but they'll bleed you dry. Henry kept listening. Work permits and employment history. You cash your check direct, so I had George write a proof of income letter. Next time, make a copy before you cash anything. You'll need it in April. He pointed at a laminated card. Driver's license. Plate transfer and registration are here. It's clean. Even the bureau will frown and move on. Don't test that with bank robberies. Henry squinted. That's it? Feels too easy. Welcome to Alaska, Tom said. Us Hawaii, Saipan. Soft spots. Tourist traps get eyeballed. Out here no one cares. DC throws incentives at places like this to keep bodies on the map. Paperwork is real. Enforcement is sleepy. He leaned in. The docs are legit. But if someone decides to pull every thread, they'll find one. So maybe don't wave them at Langley. Got it. Henry slid everything back into the envelope. Tom nodded at it. Taking that when you head out with George? No. I talked to him this morning. Annie 21 is 2 days out. No work today. I'll wait for his crew rather than gamble on strangers. Smart. The boss matters more than the rate. Tom grinned. Most kids don't get that. It only works if the boss isn't dangling promises to squeeze free labor, Henry said. Loyalty doesn't pay rent. Tom laughed. True. It's all about the stupid green paper. He paused. You free today? Quick job. In and out. Easy money. What kind of job? Go take a look at something. Quick drive. Report back. Home by dinner. Does it involve the two who just left? Tom lifted an eyebrow. Maybe it does. Maybe it doesn't. Henry set the mug down. Then I'll pass. My gut says guys who blink sideways are bad for my health. Tom raised his hands. Your choice. Henry smirked. Didn't know you were in the intel trade. In the sticks you do what you can, Tom said. I can't crab fish. I get seasick thinking about it. If I don't hustle, I'm broke. Buy a boat, Henry said. Hire someone you trust. Tom's smile thinned. That game's deeper than it looks. You're not ready for how dirty that water gets. Curiosity kills the cat. Henry knew that long before this universe. Back home, nosy people made headlines, ruined, arrested, or worse. Curiosity wasn't brave. It was dumb. He wasn't about to forget that now. He'd spent 20 years underground in a research bunker and barely 2 months in Alaska. No way he'd managed to offend anyone important yet. The sheriff watched him, sure, but the guy was more cautious than hostile. As for Tom's shady guests, odds they were after Henry, maybe 1 in 10,000. So keeping his head down wasn't paranoia. It was basic survival. Playing detective would be horror movie logic, splitting from the group and getting got in Act 1. In a world where people blinked sideways and alphabet agencies probably tracked your coffee order, curiosity got you killed. Henry chose the smart play. He left Tom's, fired up the Cadillac's heater, and headed back to Old John's bar. The next 2 days passed without incident. No visitors, no vanishing locals. Same old routine. The town drank at sunset, and Henry binged classic movies. Before King Crab season closed, he joined George's crew for 3 more runs. The last trip was short, hard cutoff on November 30th. Miss it, and the fines or license loss would gut you. Payout was different this time. No wages, just a split after expenses. Prices were still strong, so everyone cleared decent money for fewer hours. No complaints. Crab boats didn't all shut down after November, but most captains waited until January to chase armored crab. December ice wrecked smaller hulls. George didn't bother with that fishery anyway. King Crab paid his bills, poured his bourbon, and funded a few bad choices. Good enough, which led to tonight. Final haul-in. Season over. George hauled the crew to a gentleman's club to celebrate. A clean season, no injuries. Not every boat could say the same. A few drinks in, George got sentimental. He hooked Henry in a lopsided headlock and slurred, "Smart not to stay in this game. It's dying. Harder every year." He waved his glass. "They cut our season talk quotas. Overfishing. Ecosystem. Please." If the Bering didn't freeze, the crabs would own the planet. Henry watched the stage lights and nursed his drink. Most of the crew drifted to the dancers. He stayed with the booze. Mistake 1. Now he was George's emotional support animal. "Maybe too many boats," Henry said. "Imagine every hull in the state dropping pots on the same line. Traps from one horizon to the other." George shuddered. "Don't. I've had that nightmare." He kept going. "People think it's easy. Buy a boat, grab buddies, print money. They don't see how fast it goes sideways." Henry nodded. "Humans never learn from history. Doesn't matter how many die. Someone always thinks they're the exception." George barked a bitter laugh. "Right. And when we tell the truth, they call us heartless after a death. Like we could have jumped in and hauled them out ourselves." "Best you can do is call for an airlift," Henry said, "which means a heavy chopper. Those aren't exactly corner stores." George leaned in. "Between us, the rescue teams out here are window dressing. You hit that water, you're done. This season alone, 3 boats lost, 10 men gone. And that's just here." Henry raised his glass. "Reason I stuck with you. You run a tight ship." The compliment landed. George beamed, then mumbled something Henry's superbrain refused to translate. Henry smiled and nodded anyway. Then George's wife arrived. She stormed through the club like a title match walk-in. George tried the cute drunk routine. She slapped that plan out of him, slapped him once for emphasis, then hauled him out. The crew shrank into their seats. Even the bouncers cleared a path. The dancers vanished like smoke. Without the captain, the party thinned. No more free rounds. A few guys lingered, chasing after-hours promises. The rest scattered. Henry left too. Drinking wasn't fun when you couldn't get drunk. And the dancers? Supervision had downsides.
Hey everyone, Firescale Audiobooks here. If there's a novel you'd love to hear more of, you can support us on Patreon or Ko-fi. Depending on your tier, I'll make extra parts just for the stories you're most excited about. Usually I can only upload 4 to 5 parts of each novel, but with your support, we can go beyond that. And of course, don't forget to hit subscribe. It helps more than you know.
So he left. Standing near the ferry's railing, Henry watched the churning waves of the Bering Sea slam against the side of the vessel. The ferry wasn't exactly a cruise ship, but compared to the glorified bathtub he'd been crabbing on the last 2 months, this was luxury. At least it didn't feel like the ocean was trying to beat the boat into kindling every 10 seconds. Still, it brought back memories, none of them particularly pleasant. He thought about leaving some cash for old John before heading out, but the old bastard wasn't having it. The second Henry brought it up, John had torn into him with a profanity-laced rant that could strip paint off a battleship. So instead, Henry left his mark the only way he could, fixing the bar. He didn't bother asking John what needed repairs. The man thought the place was perfect the way it was, right down to the wobbling stools and mystery stains. Anyone who complained got a face full of spit and a profanity-laced sermon on how real bars don't have ing feng shui. So Henry asked the regulars instead, old drunks with more opinions than teeth. Some of the suggestions were reasonable. Others involved razing the place to the ground and rebuilding from scratch. They got the same reaction from the locals as it would have from John. A middle finger and a muttered, "Get the out of here." So Henry stuck to basic stuff. Quiet repairs, leaky plumbing, patchy wiring, rotting floorboards. He paid out of pocket, did it himself, and didn't say a word. Would he ever come back? Hard to say, because truth be told, this place, this frozen corner of nowhere, wasn't home. No one came to see him off. Old John gave him a hug, patted his back once, then went right back to wiping glasses like nothing happened. Like he was sending his sons off to war again. Same expression, same silence. The ferry was headed to Los Angeles. His Cadillac, the one he'd bought from old Tom, was parked below decks. No private cabin, no first-class service. If you wanted to sleep, you either squeezed into the communal passenger lounge or curled up in your car like a raccoon in a dumpster. The journey was a little over a day and a half. Not quick, but not hellishly slow either. Getting on the ferry, though, that was the hard part. First, he had to drive across half of Alaska to reach Juneau, the state capital. Those were the long-distance car ferries ran during this time of year. And that drive? Hell. Snow, ice, no plows, no gas stations. No roadside diners or motel signs offering hot coffee and warm beds. Just you, your food, your water, and the long, white nothing stretching from horizon to horizon. If you got stuck, you froze. End of story. At some points, he could see the road on the other side of a river or gorge, but to actually get there, that meant looping around for dozens of miles just to find a usable bridge or some patch of terrain that didn't scream, "Here lies the frozen dumbass who thought his sedan could handle this." Eventually, Henry gave up and tried flying. Literally. With no one around and nothing but snow to cover his tracks, he figured it was the perfect time to test his Kryptonian side. He wasn't expecting much. The show he grew up watching back on Earth, Smallville, took 10 seasons before their version of Superman figured out how to fly. The idea was practically engraved in pop culture. Flight is hard. You need training. You need a character arc. You need wind machines. Apparently, all that was bullshit. A couple of test jumps, and boom, he was airborne. Lifting himself, lifting the car, navigating snowdrifts and icy hills like a walking cheat code. Flight turned out to be one of the easiest things to learn. The hard part was not overdoing it. Strength was trickier. Lifting the Cadillac was no problem. Not crumpling it in the process, that took finesse. But between heat vision for melting snow and flight for skipping over impassable terrain, Henry basically bulldozed his way across Alaska like some cosmic UPS delivery truck. By the time he reached Juneau, he looked half dead but satisfied. The port workers assumed he was just another local hauling his car down for the winter. None of them guessed he'd come all the way from some forgotten fishing town in the middle of nowhere. Funny thing was, the crabbing port he left behind did have ferries. Even planes. But this time of year, the sea iced over. Ferries were canceled. Planes were weather-dependent. And getting a car shipped by freight? Good luck. That wasn't happening until spring. He could have made it easy on himself. Ditched the car, booked a flight from a small airport, caught a connecting jet to LA, and been sipping coffee in California in 12 hours. But no, he bought Tom's car. Tom, that smug bastard, sold it like he was doing Henry a favor. "It'll be useful," he said. "Reliable ride. Reliable trap, more like." The real reason? Tom wanted to offload his old caddy, probably make a quick buck, and stick the rookie with the headache. And Henry, being the trusting idiot, bought it. Hook, line, and snow-choked sinker. Lesson learned. Your friend's friend is not automatically your friend. It was a rule Henry had known before. The kind of lesson you forget until the universe slaps you with it all over again. In hindsight, it wasn't lethal. He'd survived. But if he hadn't had Kryptonian powers, he might have frozen to death, run out of fuel, or just turned back with his tail between his legs. Back in town, people had taken bets. How long would it take before Henry came crawling home? 7 days passed. No word, no return. Most assumed the worst. Crashed car, frozen corpse. Only old John held out hope. He told the others, that kid's still pushing forward. He's not the type to give up. Even so, no one went looking. Too cold, too risky. Their version of a search party was asking around at the next fishing town over. Beyond that, they said their prayers and stayed indoors. If Henry hadn't had his powers, he might have been one more name on the list of people who underestimated Alaska. Instead, he used the entire journey as a glorified training arc. Heat vision, flight, strength modulation, all in the frozen wilderness with zero witnesses. It was almost poetic, like Mother Nature personally handed him a Kryptonian jungle gym. By the time he flew his way over the final stretch and rolled into Juneau like some icy road warrior, the only thing he felt was cold toes and mild vindication. Nobody expected a guy from a middle-of-nowhere crabbing town to make that trip. Not in that weather, not driving. But he did. He made it, and he still had gas in the tank. The ferry wasn't exactly a cruise ship, but it did have a small shop on board. If you were hungry and hadn't packed food, you could buy the usual survival rations, packaged sandwiches, stale cookies, instant noodles. The most popular items? Hot coffee and alcohol. Of course, at night, most people claimed a row of seats in the public lounge, wrapping themselves in their coats and pretending they could sleep through snoring, body odor, and a gentle symphony of creaking steel. But the smart ones, the ones who brought their vehicles, just curled up in their cars. No socks in your face, no strangers talking in their sleep. Privacy, warmth, dignity. Sort of. Henry sat in the front seat of his old Cadillac, sipping cheap ferry coffee. It wasn't about staying warm. He didn't need warmth. It wasn't about a caffeine habit either. No, he was training. Specifically, training his enhanced senses. Coffee, with all its bitterness and complexity, was perfect for that. It had depth, layers, subtle chemical signatures. A great way to tune up a Kryptonian palate. Red wine came close, but the ferry's wine selection tasted like someone blended expired grape juice with regret. Even cheap coffee beat that. Tea, out of the question. Whatever passed for tea in Alaska tasted like someone boiled lawn clippings in dishwater. Henry refused to ruin his fond childhood memories of tea with that kind of trauma. So there he sat, letting the bitter notes of over-roasted beans hit his tongue, while his mind worked through a much bigger problem. Now what? He could hide out in Alaska forever, sure. Live cheap, work the crabbing season, enjoy the quiet. But he hadn't spent 2 decades as a lab rat in a Russian hole just to die in a fishing town no one could spell. He was an American now, the land of the free, the home of the supersized. If he didn't at least see the country, it'd feel like a wasted second life. The problem was, he had no plan. Superpowered or not, Henry had no diploma, no resume, and no network. The classic Clark Kent route, reporter by day, superhero by night, was off the table. Journalism required credentials, and Henry didn't even have a high school transcript. From what little intel he'd scraped together in Alaska, the only confirmed Marvel-ish figures in this world were Captain America and mutants. No sign of Gotham, Metropolis, or Central City, which meant no Batman, no Superman, and, thank God, no psychotic billionaires or brooding orphans throwing batarangs. In other words, no Justice League. Just Marvel. That raised the world's survival odds dramatically. But back to real problems. Even if you wanted to go normie, the options weren't great. America's working-class landscape was shifting. Globalization was sucking up manufacturing jobs. If you weren't in tech, finance, or a massive corporate machine, you were getting left behind, which meant even something as humble as factory work was a gamble. And Henry? He was technically an undocumented extraterrestrial immigrant. Even with forged paperwork and an official identity, he wasn't fooling the IRS or Homeland Security forever. The truth was, most jobs he could get weren't worth it. Retail? Not a chance. Low pay, high stress, and Henry had a short fuse for the customer is always right types. He wasn't a people person. Never had been. Not before the abduction. Not after. He'd never even had a girlfriend, much less experience dealing with the public day in and day out. Anyone told him Smile More was getting launched into orbit. That also ruled out anything in healthcare, teaching, hospitality, or public service. Which left what exactly? Lab rat. Yeah, that was probably the most viable option, signing up for clinical trials. Get poked, prodded, and studied by scientists. At least they'd feed him. But then again, the risk of getting dissected by accident was a little too real, especially for someone not technically human. Joining the police or military. Please. The second they ran a loyalty test, he'd be flagged, detained, and locked in a cell so fast it'd make the raft look like summer camp. So, bank robbery? God, no wonder the U.S. had a gang problem. For a country built on dreams, it sure didn't leave many paths open unless you already had money, status, or an Ivy League daddy. Even gambling wasn't a real option. Casinos let you win just enough to keep you hopeful. Try walking out a long-term winner and you'd find yourself blacklisted, or worse. Okay, fine. That left money. He'd pulled in some decent cash from crabbing. First trip, $80,000. Then two more at $100,000 each. The final short trip netted $50,000, all in cash. After a brutal 6% withdrawal fee, plus costs for the car, paperwork, and supplies, he was sitting on about $300,000. Before taxes. And taxes were a thing. The great American government always got its cut. Once he filed, he'd be lucky to have half of it left. But even $150,000 wasn't bad. In a country where a steak dinner cost $10 and a beer was barely $1.50, he could stretch that for a while, if he lived smart. No drugs, no investments, no buying flashy toys or chasing trophy girls. Just low-key living. Maybe take a few more crabbing gigs next season to top off the bank account. Live like a ghost. Boring? Maybe, but stable. Still, stability wasn't enough. Not for him. People without purpose rot. Henry knew that firsthand. He'd already spent 20 years wasting away in a lab cell. Even when he was doing nothing back on his old Earth, he at least had anime, video games, movies, a job. Something. But this world? It was the 1990s. Apple was just starting to matter. The internet was still in a college dorm. Gaming meant 16-bit cartridges and Game Boys. Cute for nostalgia, sure. But compared to AAA games and cinematic universes, it was like trading steak for cardboard. And again, no qualifications. So getting into the tech industry? Off the table. That left one oddball possibility. Hollywood. Yeah, he'd set his first real destination as Los Angeles. Subconsciously, maybe he was chasing the lights, the cameras, the fantasy. Hell, after everything he'd been through, maybe he just wanted to stand on a soundstage, throw a fake punch, and scream, "I'm gonna take all 10 of you sons of bitches." Corny? Sure, but kind of badass too. And if it didn't work out, well, he could always go back to the Bering Sea. If Henry was serious about stepping into the entertainment industry, the first question was simple: on screen or behind the scenes? Behind the scenes meant skills, real ones. Audio, camera work, color correction, depth of field, lighting, production design, editing, sure, some of it came down to talent, but you still needed the foundation. Without a solid understanding of film theory, you weren't getting anywhere near a Hollywood set unless you were holding someone's coffee. And then there were those system-breaking stories he'd read back in his old life. Chinese fanfics where the MC wrote a killer script, got discovered, and suddenly became the next Spielberg. Cute idea. In reality, that route was a crapshoot. See, most Hollywood scripts didn't come from unsolicited submissions. They'd been sitting in studio vaults for years, sometimes decades, waiting for just the right moment. And even when those scripts got greenlit, they were rewritten so many times, the original authors would barely recognize them. Take Forrest Gump, for example. A box office hit in '94. Heartwarming. Inspirational, quintessential American dream story. Except the source material? A brutal political satire. A man with below-average IQ stumbling through major events in U.S. history and somehow becoming rich? Yeah, not exactly subtle. If you squinted, it was practically the author flipping off the American public while saying, "It's not personal. I just think y'all are idiots. But after Hollywood got its hands on it, poof, satire gone. Welcome to inspiration porn, America. The script didn't just get rewritten, it got a full-on identity transplant. The only thing left intact was the basic human anatomy: 2 eyes, 1 nose, 1 mouth. So yeah, Henry wasn't betting on breaking in as a screenwriter. That left acting. At least with acting, the first barrier to entry was pretty straightforward. You just needed a face. Unfortunately, everybody had one, which meant competition was brutal. Thousands of hopefuls flooding Hollywood every year, all thinking they'd be the next Brad Pitt. That's how you ended up with casting couches and networking that looked more like softcore blackmail. Still, Henry wasn't aiming to be an A-lister. He had savings from his crabbing gigs. If he kept his expectations low, blend into the background, work as an extra, chase niche roles, he could make this work. Hell, maybe even fund a weird side project like nostalgic video game collecting or retro TV binging. No expectations, no disappointments. That was the motto. He didn't need to win an Oscar, didn't need to buy a mansion in Beverly Hills or a Bugatti for every day of the week. He wasn't trying to outpace some silver spoon Wall Street baby or become a tabloid god. All he wanted was a quiet life, lived on his terms. Of course, this was still America, the land of freedom, where school shootings were more frequent than snowfall. Good thing he was bulletproof. As long as he stayed out of New York, he'd avoid the really weird stuff. No Avengers Tower, no S.H.I.E.L.D. drama, no purple aliens looking to erase half the universe. And if Thanos really did show up one day with his rock collection, snap his fingers, and sent half of existence into the void, Henry's odds were 50-50. Big deal. If he survived, cool. If not, well, it wasn't like he had a family. No one was waiting for him. Death wouldn't be some great tragedy. It would just be quiet. Honestly, people overhyped the snap. A quick death was better than being slowly eaten alive by disease, debt, or despair. Henry had already lived through a different kind of hell. 2 decades locked up in a Soviet black site, poked and prodded until he didn't know where his body ended and the test tubes began. Every inch of him had been someone's experiment. They'd sliced, injected, scanned, and broken him in every way except mercy. If they'd had a little more time, they probably would have started amputating, an arm here, a leg there. Hell, maybe even taken his brain apart just to see what made it tick. So no, he wasn't afraid of dying in some intergalactic balancing act. He'd faced worse. Let the Avengers save the day. Let the gods and mutants and tech billionaires punch each other across skylines. He'd be over here, in his lane, living slow and quiet. He wasn't here to carry the world's problems on his back. He wasn't out to rescue kittens or stop meteorites. He didn't give a damn if someone's house got robbed or their toilet exploded. Not his circus, not his planet. Hell, the fact that he hadn't gone full supervillain was already a win for humanity. He wasn't plotting revenge on the world. He wasn't blackmailing governments or starting cults. He wasn't even trying to rewrite history. You know what he was doing? Letting Russia collapse without lifting a damn finger. The Red Empire was about to crumble, and Henry wasn't getting involved. What would be the point? What would he even gain? Robbery? He was a Kryptonian, for crying out loud. If he wanted money, he could rob any bank, anytime, anywhere. Walk into the Federal Reserve, melt the vault doors with heat vision, and walk out with gold bars hot enough to fry bacon. No one would even know where they came from. Stock trading? Arbitrage? That was for desperate hustlers, not god-tier aliens. Could he buy up Russian state assets for pennies on the dollar? Maybe, if he had capital, connections, and a ruthless streak. But all he had was 300 grand and a car with bad shocks. Revenge on the scientists who tortured him? Yeah, no. It'd be poetic, sure, but where would he even find them? It's not like they handed out business cards in the Gulag. And let's be honest, most of them were probably about to suffer more than he ever could dish out. The Soviet collapse would chew them up and spit them out. But if they somehow crawled out of the rubble and made something of themselves, then it'd be worth showing up, just in time to ruin everything. Just for the fun of it. After all, death isn't always punishment. Sometimes living is the real curse. Turns out, old Tom, the man who nearly earned himself a Kryptonian punch, was right about one thing. Nobody checked a damn thing when you rolled off a ferry from Alaska into the port of Los Angeles. No inspections, no bag checks, not even a bored glance under the hood. Just show your ticket when you get on and drive off like you're coming home from the grocery store. Pre 9/11 America, land of paranoia abroad, but blind confidence at home. If trouble happened, it was always somewhere else. Never here. Henry guided the Cadillac onto the streets of L.A. with the steady hands of someone still trying to convince himself this was real. The highways stretched wide, the buildings grew taller, and every few miles, the landscape changed just enough to make him question where he was. When he hit the coast, he slowed down, expecting golden sunlight, warm sands, and an army of bronzed beach bums in bikinis. What he got was wind. Cold, biting ocean wind that whistled through the window and slapped him in the face. Even with his Kryptonian resistance to cold, it still felt dumb, driving with the window down in December. Like owning a convertible in a rainstorm and refusing to close the top. So you just sit there in a poncho, holding an umbrella. He passed a few lunatics on surfboards, full wetsuits on, carving through winter waves like they'd made a deal with Poseidon. Gotta admit, they were good. You'd have to be to ride waves like that in weather like this. Farther down the beach, a film crew was shooting something. Cameras, lights, the whole circus. In the middle of it, some models, tan, lean, and plastic perfect, smiled like it was mid-July, lounging around in swimwear that did nothing to hide the fact that they were freezing their asses off. Behind the camera, everyone else was bundled up like it was the Antarctic. Showbiz, huh? Watching that ridiculous little production, something in Henry finally clicked. Yeah, I'm really here. Now what? He'd spent plenty of time on the ferry thinking through big-picture stuff. Where to live, what kind of life to build, whether to punch Thanos in the face if it ever came to that. But now was time for logistics. Pulling over near a street-side newsstand, he killed the engine, stepped out, and made his way over. $5, he said, pulling a wrinkled bill from his coat. One copy of the Los Angeles Times. And, do you have a city map? The middle-aged vendor barely looked up. Tourist map? Or you need something detailed? Detailed, Henry replied. I'll be living here for a while. The man nodded and handed over a folded map. Here you go. Change is right there. He dropped a few coins into Henry's palm, then added, Where are you from? Alaska, Henry said without hesitation. The vendor gave him a once-over. That explains the snow gear. I was starting to think L.A. was about to get hit with a blizzard. Henry looked down at his heavy-duty coat. Windproof, waterproof, the whole package. Not your average L.A. winter wear. God, I've seen enough snow for 5 lifetimes. Does it ever snow here? Rarely, the man said with a shrug. Only if it gets real cold. If you're into skiing, try Big Bear Lake, east of here. Great slopes. No thanks, Henry said dryly. I see snow, I get flashbacks. Last thing I want to do is slide down a mountain for fun. They shared a brief laugh, the kind strangers swap when they both know life's been stupid lately. Henry nodded toward the decorations strung up on nearby poles. Holiday season coming. Yep, Christmas, then New Year's. Same crap every year. No surprises. If one year did have surprises, Henry said with a smirk, that'd probably be bad news. The vendor chuckled. Ain't that the truth? Henry waved, heading back toward the car. Thanks. Take care. Merry Christmas, the man called. Merry Christmas. Back in the car, Henry realized he hadn't eaten since the ferry docked. The sun was past noon, and his stomach was putting in a formal complaint. He cruised around until he found a family diner that didn't reek of fryer grease and bad decisions. Nothing fancy, just clean, warm, and open. He parked, grabbed his map, his newspaper, and most importantly, his overstuffed backpack. That pack held his entire net worth. Nearly 300 grand in cash, packed into tight rolls of hundreds. Not the kind of thing you leave sitting in the car on the streets of L.A. Not unless you want someone breaking your window and disappearing with your life savings. For casual spending, he had smaller bills stashed in various coat pockets. If anyone watched him dig around for change at a register, they'd think he was flat broke. A skill he'd mastered in his old life. Never let them know you've got money. Play dumb. Play poor. Play dead if you had to. Inside, The diner was half empty. Perfect. He slid into a sunlit booth, placed his bag on the inside seat, and shed the heavy coat. A waitress approached, a squat, no-nonsense woman with tired eyes and a coffee pot. "Hot coffee?" she asked. "Please," Henry replied. "Bless you." He flipped over the empty mug on its saucer, letting her pour as he warmed his hands. "Need anything else?" she asked. "Yeah, sweetheart," he said, flashing a crooked smile. "I haven't eaten lunch yet. What's cooking?" She rolled her eyes in a way that said she'd heard it all but wasn't entirely offended. "We've got bacon, sausage, eggs, any style. Or I could fry you up a steak." "Hit me with everything," Henry said, tossing back half his coffee in one go. "And sweetheart, if it's no trouble, just leave the pot." "Sure," she said, leaving the half-full carafe behind before heading off to the kitchen. Even though her face said, "Don't try anything," her steps as she left were just a little lighter. A few minutes later, she returned with a plate piled high with bacon, sausage, and sunny-side-up eggs. "Steak's coming," she said. "You want toast or biscuits?" "Toast fine, thanks." She glanced at the map Henry had spread across the table. "So what are you? College kid? Tourist? Or chasing the Hollywood dream?" Henry folded the map and set it aside. "I'd like to try a bit of everything," he said with a crooked grin. "Though chasing the dream? That one's a long shot, depends on luck." The waitress gave him a slow once-over, eyes flicking from head to toe before landing back on his face. Her lips curled into a sly smile. "With a face like that, Han," she said, "you do real well up in the valley." "Ah, the valley. San Fernando Valley. Known for a few tourist attractions and about 300 adult film production companies." Henry chuckled. "Let's hope I don't hit rock bottom that fast." He speared a strip of bacon with his fork, rolled it, and shoved it in whole. No cutting, no ceremony, just hunger and meat. He gave a thumbs up between chews. "Damn good bacon." The waitress smirked, proud. "Take your time." Henry took the more civilized route with the sausage, slicing it up instead of risking what could easily be misinterpreted as certain skills better suited for casting couches and Van Nuys. Despite the banter, he meant what he said. The food was good. He'd picked the place by smell, after all, and his Kryptonian senses weren't wrong. With his meals sorted and the map now committed to memory, Henry turned to the newspaper. Front page, political drama up near the Arctic Circle. The Red Empire was starting to crack, at least according to the American press, which was practically drooling at the thought. Henry knew better. This wasn't analysis, it was wish-casting. The U.S. media had a long tradition of talking big and hoping reality followed suit. But hey, sometimes enough yelling did bring down an empire. The rest of the news? Mostly fluff about Christmas events, charity drives, celebrity statements. Everything bland enough to numb your brain. He skimmed it until he hit the entertainment and sports sections. NBA. The Bulls were on fire. Michael Jordan was starting his rampage. If Henry's memory served, 91 would mark the dawn of a dynasty. The 90s belonged to Black Jesus, and the rest of the league was about to get baptized in LS. MLB. Off-season. Nothing to see here. NFL. Now that was America's real religion. Preseason in August, full season in September, and the Super Bowl in February. But unlike basketball or baseball, football was very much a homegrown obsession. The rest of the world didn't care, and neither did Henry. More interesting was the movie section. Christmas meant award season. Gold statues, rigged campaigns, and self-congratulation in high definition. Harvey Weinstein hadn't started bribing the entire Academy yet, so at least the scandals weren't daily headlines. That was still a few years off. Right now, the talk of the town was Dances with Wolves. There was also Ghost, Pretty Woman, and Home Alone for lighter fare. The year had been packed with sequels too. The Godfather 3, Back to the Future Part 3, Gremlins 2, The Exorcist 3, and a third installment of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, because why not? But the real surprise? A film called Captain America. Henry blinked at the synopsis. Apparently, this version of Cap never sacrificed himself in World War II. Instead, he fought a cartoonishly evil crime family that hated environmental laws and, for reasons unknown, had kidnapped the president. It was basically a Hallmark special in spandex. That said, In a world where Steve Rogers actually existed, it was bold of Hollywood to turn him into tabloid fan fiction. Sure, Cap didn't have any surviving family, but the guy was still technically military property, and the military didn't usually take kindly to people playing fast and loose with their icons. Then again, this was the same military that had ridden the Top Gun hype train straight into a recruitment surge back in '86. They and Hollywood were in bed together, spooning with a budget. Letting a movie cap save the president? Yeah, Uncle Sam wasn't going to complain. Oddly enough, the movie had gained traction. Maybe it was the nostalgia. Maybe it was respect. But a bunch of major names, Kevin Costner, Whoopi Goldberg, Scorsese, even Coppola, were publicly praising it. Though, Henry noted, most of their compliments were directed at Steve Rogers the hero, not the film itself. Smart move. Never insult the symbol, even if the product was garbage. Hell, the old World War II recruitment posters had already swapped out Uncle Sam's pointing finger for Cap's clean-cut jawline. The man was more myth than soldier now. Henry flipped past the puff pieces and found the entertainment gossip, celebrity scandals, divorce rumors, probably 40% true at best. Not a single preview for next year's films. Probably because the press was too busy slobbering over the upcoming Golden Globes and Oscars. His steak arrived just as he hit the final page of the paper. A hefty slab, seared to perfection with a side of golden fries. The toast was already gone. He carved the meat like a savage, fork in one hand, newspaper in the other. No etiquette, no pretense. This wasn't fine dining, it was a diner. No one gave a damn. By the time he swallowed the last bite of steak, the newspaper was folded and done. He poured himself another cup of coffee and raised a hand to flag down the waitress. "Hey, sweetheart," he called. "You got a Yellow Pages?" She pointed toward the payphone near the door. "Underneath. Big fat book." Henry got up, retrieved the directory, and brought it back to his seat. He flipped it open like it was a treasure map. Because in 1990, if you wanted information, you didn't Google it. You either asked a bartender, paid some shady guy in an alley, or you cracked open the goddamn Yellow Pages. Published by the phone company, funded by ads, this prehistoric search engine listed everything from mechanics to magicians. Even private numbers organized by last name. 20 years from now, someone would sue the hell out of a company for leaking personal data. But in this era, totally normal. Sure, it only updated once a year, but for now, it was the best tool Henry had. The waitress came by to swap out Henry's half-empty coffee pot with a fresh one. "You looking for something specific?" "Yeah. First thing's a cheap motel," Henry replied, flipping through the Yellow Pages. "Otherwise, I'll be sleeping in a public park tonight." She leaned over, flipped past the page he was on, and tapped an ad with a painted finger. "Try this place. Not the Ritz, but it's safe enough." Henry raised a brow. The address was up north, closer to Hollywood than downtown. That meant she was probably giving him a genuine tip, not trying to steer him toward a place where she could claim a referral kickback. Smart. If she wanted a cut, she would have picked one down the street. He jotted down the name and address. Appreciate it. After fishing through various pockets like a broke college student, he scraped together enough bills and coins to cover the meal. He left a generous tip on the table that finally got a real smile out of her. Turns out sweet words and charm were nice, but cold, hard cash still had the stronger magic. Henry returned the Yellow Pages to its stand, slung his worn-out backpack over one shoulder, and headed back to the car. Inside that pack sat the bulk of his earthly possessions and tens of thousands of dollars in cash. Not exactly the sort of thing you leave in a car window, like a "rob me" sign. Sure, bullets couldn't hurt him, but dealing with break-ins and petty thefts would be a massive pain in the ass. Renting a place would take time, and buying one? Not unless he wanted a shack in the desert. A motel would have to do for now. He headed north. The drive was uneventful, and, more importantly, the neighborhood around the motel looked decent. No sketchy guys hanging out in wife-beaters and bandanas. No women tottering around in miniskirts and fur coats that looked more like roadkill. No one working the corner in broad daylight. In other words, passable. Henry pulled into the lot of this squat little roadside motel. Not seedy, not flashy, just anonymous. Perfect. The reception area looked empty at first glance, but as he stepped in, he spotted a heavy-set woman parked behind the desk, mostly hidden by the high counter. She was propped up in a chair, sipping Coke, munching on potato chips, and glued to a soap opera blaring on the tiny TV behind her. Henry tapped the bell. Twice. She didn't even pretend she hadn't seen him. "Whatcha need?" she called without looking up. "One person, one room." "How much a night?" "20, she replied, still eyes on the screen. Henry pulled a crumpled $100 bill from his chest pocket and slapped it on the counter. "5 nights. Key, please." Like a machine, she reached with one hand for a key off the wall hook and slid it onto the desk, then used her other hand to snag the bill and shove it out of sight. Only when the money was in her fingers did her eyes flick down to check the denomination. Not once did she question its authenticity. Not even a glance under UV light or a pen stroke. Just blind faith in the almighty dollar. And why not? America had always assumed its money was untouchable, even though half the world's counterfeit cash was in U.S. bills. But unless you were dumb enough to hand fake money to the IRS, most people wouldn't risk blowing up their own shady operation by reporting it. She slid over a paper guest book. "Sign here." Henry looked at the scrawled names already in the log. Half of them might as well have been ancient runes or doctor's prescriptions. Even with a super brain, he could only decipher a few. He hesitated for a moment, then, on a whim, scribbled down the name, Clark Kent. Not because he wanted to be cute. It just felt safer. Leaving his real name here felt wrong. Like using your personal email to sign up for a sketchy website. Old instincts kicking in. She didn't blink. Didn't ask for ID. Didn't care. He took the key and slouched out with a sigh. Honestly, the whole no ID thing made him a little uneasy. Sure, it was convenient, but it also meant anyone could check in under a fake name, do God knows what, and no one would question it. He turned back. "You got a Yellow Pages?" She cackled at something on the TV. One in every room. Right next to the phone. "Hey," at least she answered. For $20 a night, he wasn't expecting concierge service. The room was exactly what you'd expect from every low-budget motel in every crime movie ever made. Tacky wallpaper, low lighting, and furniture that had seen better decades. But it was clean. Sheets were fresh. Floors vacuumed. No visible bloodstains or mysterious smells. The detergent on the sheets was strong enough to sting his Kryptonian-enhanced nose. His sinuses might never recover. He dropped his coat on the wall hook and tossed his backpack onto the bed. His entire net worth in a single duffel bag. The Yellow Pages was right where she said it'd be, under the rotary phone bolted to the nightstand. The cover said it was last year's edition, but that didn't matter. He wasn't looking for pop-up startups. He needed long-standing operations. For a second, Henry stood in the middle of the room, just breathing. This was it. No more crab boats. No more snow. No more quiet Alaskan mornings with old John yelling at him from the bar. Now it was cheap motels, Hollywood pipe dreams, and a city that chewed people up for sport. He flopped back onto the springy mattress. The difference hit him instantly. This wasn't a lumpy couch in a freezing bar. Wasn't John's creaky guest bed. Wasn't the front seat of a car under 1,000 Alaskan stars. This was Los Angeles. Loud, gritty, alive. He didn't feel hopeless. Not quite. But there was a weight in his chest now, one he hadn't noticed before. Because now it was real. He'd made it. And now came the hard part. Having powers doesn't guarantee success, he thought. Dinner that night was a delivered pizza with a complimentary 2-liter bottle of soda. Good old high-fructose happiness. Looking at the greasy box and the oversized soda, Henry couldn't help but think, no wonder Americans keep getting bigger. It wasn't just a stereotype. It was practically engineered. Food here was cheap, dense, and designed to hit every craving center in the brain. And it wasn't like the rest of the world didn't have shut-ins and couch potatoes. But America had a unique breed, the can't-leave-their-bed level of sedentary. Guys tipping the scales at hundreds of pounds who had to be lifted by crane or fire department assistants just to see daylight. Of course, on the flip side, this epidemic had been a gold mine for gyms, personal trainers, and wellness industries. Rich folks especially, the ones who had time to sculpt their bodies between stock trades and yoga classes, kept the fitness economy humming. Then there were the gym rats, the kind who live for reps, protein shakes, and questionable steroids. A whole separate evolutionary branch. Henry suddenly remembered that one Avengers film where Thor let himself go and turned into a beer-gutted, sweatpants-wearing shadow of a god. The memory made him glance down at his own stomach. Does Kryptonian physiology prevent obesity? He wondered grimly. But the hunger was real. After years in that Russian black site, where he'd once been so starved he nearly considered scraping plaster off the walls for a snack, Henry wasn't about to let a hot meal go to waste. He took a bite and immediately regretted it. Now, Henry wasn't picky. Never had been. As long as food was edible, he'd eat it. But this pizza tasted like it had lost a fight with a tire fire and been drowned in regret. The cheese was rubbery, the sauce suspiciously sweet, and the crust had the texture of wet cardboard. He swallowed out of principle. There were now 4 categories of food in his mind. Delicious, edible, inedible, and now a 4th. Edible but emotionally damaging. This pizza belonged squarely in that 4th category. Throwing it away felt wasteful. Eating it felt like betrayal. And with his heightened Kryptonian taste buds, it was even worse. The flavors were too vivid. Every rancid oil and fake tomato tang was dialed up to 11. No wonder they gave you 2 liters of soda with this crap, he thought, chugging the cola like mouthwash. From now on, one thing was clear. Wherever he rented, it needed to have a kitchen. If eating out was going to taste like this, he'd be better off cooking for himself. If Yelp existed in 1990, Henry would have rage-reviewed this place into the ground with a solid 1-star rating and a scathing paragraph. To distract himself, he pulled the motel's yellow pages out from under the phone and flipped through, looking for tomorrow's to-do list. No internet, no reviews, no ratings, just bold names, addresses, and hopeful ad slogans. Trial and error, then. He sighed. Well, if you're going to play in a new city, you've got to be willing to lose a few games. As long as he played it smart. No greed, no unnecessary risks. He could pull out before anything got too messy. And if anyone tried to solve problems with violence, he grinned. Let him try. He was Kryptonian, after all. The next morning, Henry stepped outside into the crisp LA winter sun. The rays weren't as harsh as in summer. Gentle, warm, almost coaxing. Unlike summer's blazing death orb, winter's sunshine invited you out, made you want to follow it. Unfortunately, LA also came with industrial smog and years of being an urban jungle. Deep breaths weren't refreshing. They were a gamble. Every inhale came with a question mark. Is that a lungful of oxygen or exhaust fumes? He cleaned himself up, threw on a fresh shirt, and hit the street. Breakfast came from a hot dog stand run by a grinning old black man who handed over a loaded dog drowned in mustard. It wasn't gourmet, but it did the job. He even offered a soda with it, which Henry politely declined. The stuff looked like it came straight from a bacteria petri dish. He'd seen less alarming fluids in alien experiments. Stomach settled. Henry's next priority was the money. He'd been walking around with tens of thousands in cash on him, most of it crammed into that small, overstuffed backpack. Not ideal, not safe, not sustainable. Stashing it in a motel room or a future rental wasn't smart either. Too easy for someone to break in, or for the whole place to burn down in one of LA's charming little structure fires. No, he needed a bank. He hadn't opened an account in Alaska for a reason. The local banks up there were mostly isolated. Sure, they'd take your money, but good luck accessing it once you hit the lower 48. And converting a check from an Alaskan bank into cash on the mainland? That was a roulette wheel of fees and red tape. Now that he was aiming for something real in LA, maybe even stepping into the Hollywood circuit, he had to play the part. Cashing checks or handling payments without a real bank account would turn into a headache fast. Small banks? Too sketchy. Too many of them were traps, dressed up with high interest rates and personal touch marketing, but once you signed up, you were at their mercy. Hidden fees, nonsense policies, impossible customer service. And the big boys? Not exactly trustworthy either. He remembered all too clearly the news headlines from his old world. Barings Bank, Lehman Brothers, Silicon Valley Bank, all massive institutions that crumbled spectacularly, each collapse sounding alarms even for people who didn't know a bond from a baguette. If you weren't in the system with insider knowledge, you were just another sheep lining up for shearing. But today, driving through the streets, he spotted a Citibank branch. Big, visible, predictable. Sometimes that was all you needed. He parked, grabbed his bag, money still weighing it down like bricks, and stepped out into the morning sun. Time to get his name? Well, a name on the books. Henry didn't exactly look homeless, but he also wasn't dressed like someone expecting red carpet treatment. His jacket was decent, the beard clean-shaven courtesy of a quick heat vision trim. But his hair? Wild, unkempt, like a man who'd fought a windstorm and lost. The old backpack on his shoulder didn't help matters. Well, at least it looked full. If it had been flat and empty, he might have looked more like someone planning to rob the place than open an account. As expected, none of the bank tellers at Citibank rushed over to greet him. That was fine. He walked straight to the info counter and asked plainly, "Hi, I'd like to open an account. What's the process?" He was quickly directed to a consultation cubicle, where a sharply dressed black man in a too-tight suit and an expression that screamed, "I don't get paid enough for this," waited behind a desk. "Good afternoon, sir. How can I assist you today?" the banker asked, with the kind of customer service tone that tried a little too hard to mask the disdain underneath. He had the air of someone eager to distinguish himself from the background he thought Henry belonged to. Henry didn't care. He dropped the backpack onto the desk and unzipped it. Inside were stacks of cash, neatly bundled, banded, and resting like a miniature treasure hoard. "Open an account. Deposit this." "Thanks." The banker's smile faltered. "We don't accept unverified cash deposits," he said flatly, eyes narrowing. "Especially not of this nature." Henry wasn't surprised. In a country like America, where laundering dirty money was a national sport, banks had to be cautious. Sometimes they took the money, smiled, and then froze the account the next day with a shiny little court order. "No problem," Henry said, reaching into his jacket. "Here's my paperwork." He laid it out calmly. Proof of employment on an Alaskan crabbing boat, pay stubs, a scanned copy of the original check, a letter of verification from the issuing bank, and finally, a legitimate-looking Social Security card. The banker took the documents, brows lifting ever so slightly as he read through them. Then he noticed something else. The money wasn't just thrown together. It was banded with an Alaskan bank seal. Not street cash. It either came from a bank or from robbing one. Still, his tone softened. "How much are you looking to deposit today, sir? And what kind of account are you opening? Would you like to hear about our investment portfolio options?" The sales pitch was automatic. He probably saw dollar signs in his head. Hell, with a commission-based bonus system, who could blame him? Henry didn't hesitate. $290,000. Open a checking account with $20,000. The rest goes into savings. I want a checkbook and a credit card application. That's it. The man blinked, then nodded, already reaching for forms. "Of course. We'll need to make copies of your documents, if that's all right." "Go ahead." As the banker disappeared with the paperwork, a colleague wheeled over a bill counter, equipped with counterfeit detection, naturally, and began counting the cash. It took time, but no alarms were raised. No surprise fakes. No drama. Henry didn't expect any. He wasn't here to make a scene. He was just a guy with some money and a Kryptonian tolerance for bureaucracy. The account itself was free to open, as long as the minimum deposit was met, and Henry more than met it. The checkbook and credit card required fees, of course, but he had a few thousand in walk-around cash and made the payments easily. His method of paying, though, digging into every pocket, pulling out random bills like a disheveled magician, earned him a few long-suffering sighs from the banker. "Keep pretending," Henry thought with a smirk. "You don't know the half of it." Once the final form was signed and the debit card handed over, Henry stepped out into the sunlit LA street, stomach rumbling. The credit card would take a couple weeks to process, assuming the bank's background checks went smoothly. Since he didn't have a fixed address yet, the banker had told him to come back in 2 weeks to check on it in person. And no, just because he'd deposited a small fortune didn't mean the bank was going to bend over backward for him. This was America, after all, and 290 grand in cash might raise eyebrows, but it didn't open doors. Not unless you were already someone or knew someone. Still, walking out of that bank, Henry felt something strange stir in his chest. Connection. Like another tether had been tied between him and this new world. A sign that he wasn't just drifting through it anymore. He was settling in, for better or worse. The past 20 years of his existence were a blur of isolation and silence. Sometimes, it was easy to forget he was human at all. He had no one, no roots, no purpose. Sure, he could have turned bitter, could have gone full supervillain and nuked a city just to watch the world burn. But what was the point? He'd been a nobody before he crossed into this universe. And he was still a nobody now, just one with heat vision and bulletproof skin. He wasn't born to rule. He didn't want to rule. He just wanted a life. Maybe that was why he'd spent so much time in Alaska binging old movies, classics that existed in both worlds. Trying to find fragments of his old self hidden between film grain and end credits. Even in the middle of Bering Sea storms, that sense of unreality never fully left him. The cold didn't bite. The waves didn't shake him. The crab traps may as well have been made of foam. Like a max-level character stomping through a beginner's dungeon. Too strong. Too numb. Part of him had wanted to stay at sea forever. If the captains had allowed it, he might have spent every crab season out there. A machine in a man's shape. But then came Los Angeles. Here, the cheat codes didn't mean anything. Being bulletproof didn't help you land a role. Having X-ray vision didn't get you a meeting with a casting director. Kryptonian muscle wasn't worth jack in an audition room. He was really starting from scratch now. He briefly wondered, should I pivot? Use my powers more directly? Rob a bank? God, why did that idea keep circling back? Honestly, the thought of being a superhero had never appealed to him. Too much responsibility. Too much misery. Look at every caped crusader on screen. Trauma, guilt, dead parents, existential dread. No thanks. He didn't have some noble dream of self-sacrifice. He wasn't a martyr. He was just a guy trying to get by. If someone else wanted to play hero, they could knock themselves out. Let Spider-Man swing through New York. Let Cap punch Nazis. Henry just wanted to sleep in, eat real food, and not get shot at, unless it was funny. Unless the Marvel Universe completely went to hell and he was forced out of his laid-back lifestyle. He wasn't changing a damn thing. If being lazy was a crime, he was guilty as hell and proud of it. Standing on the sidewalk, feeling the warmth of the midday sun on his skin, Henry took a deep breath. Smoggy, yes, but it was a smog now. Los Angeles. Phase 2. His new life had officially begun. After wrapping up the bank visit, Henry headed to a nearby photo studio. In the 2020s, these places were nearly extinct, relics of the analog era. But back in the early 90s, they were still everywhere, especially in Los Angeles, where Hollywood's shadow loomed over everything. Every storefront had glossy sample shots on display. Airbrushed beauties, shirtless hunks, sultry headshots bathed in dramatic lighting. Some studios even showcased prints of real celebrities, either current stars or their younger, more glamorous selves. Tourists wanted mementos. Dreamers wanted a shot at the big time. And in a town like this, a good photo wasn't just a keepsake. It was currency. Henry didn't care much for glamour shots. He wasn't here to strike a pose or make a scrapbook. He just needed a proper ID photo. The last set he'd taken, courtesy of Old Tom in Alaska, looked like something ripped from a police lineup. Bad lighting, grainy film, and an angle that made him look like he crawled out of a sewer after losing a fight with a cinder block. The kind of photo where if you smiled, it'd still end up as your mugshot. He didn't even bother asking for the negatives. But now that he was in L.A., with plans to register with the Screen Actors Guild or apply for legitimate work, he needed something cleaner, something that wouldn't immediately scream serial killer. At minimum, a halfway decent headshot. This wasn't the future where you could take a selfie, slap on a filter, and email it to a casting agent before lunch. Digital cameras were still the size of toasters, and image quality was garbage. If you wanted photos, you went to Photo Studio. He picked one not far from the motel, convenient for pickup, and stepped inside, only to be greeted by a rotund, greasy-haired white guy who waddled up with the enthusiasm of a car salesman spotting fresh meat. "Welcome, welcome. What can I do for you today?" The man grinned, belly jiggling under a stained dress shirt. Wedding packages, just $6,600. Family portraits for $1,200. Actor headshots, $3,800. Personal artistic series, just $2,200. Outdoor shoots cost extra, but you'll get 3 full rolls of film to choose from. And hey, bring a friend, and I'll knock 20% off both of you. Henry stared blankly. What the hell is this? The Ferrari dealership of photo studios. It was like walking in to buy a scooter and finding out they only sold Lamborghinis. I'm just here for an ID photo, Henry said, still trying to process the sticker shock. Aw, come on, kid. Don't you want to capture your youth while you still have it? The guy's sales pitch never missed a beat. Nope, just an ID photo. Listen, when you're old and wrinkled and eating soup with a straw, you'll regret not letting me preserve your prime. Buddy, I've lived through 2 puberty cycles, Henry thought. Pretty sure I'm good. But he didn't want to start an argument. And this certainly wasn't the only photo studio in L.A. So he turned to leave. Wait. Fine. ID photo it is. Can't believe I'm wasting my talents on this. But all right. Henry paused. Maybe if the guy dropped the extortion-level prices, he could deal with a little theatrics. I need 12 2-inch and 12 1-inch prints, Henry said. What's the price? Flat rate, $60. Henry didn't even argue, just turned back toward the door. Whoa, hang on. Not good enough. Name your price then. 30. I'll pay half up front. Jesus, are you part Jewish? The man snapped. Go ahead, try finding another studio with a deal like that. Henry rolled his eyes. Wish I were. I'm actually an alien. Thanks. 50. Final offer. 30. Come on, man, 40. That's cost. I'm practically losing money. Henry turned again, not playing the haggling game. All right. 30 it is, the man barked. God damn it. I hope you're Jewish. At least then I could say this was cultural. Hell, maybe Hitler should have tried harder and we'd have avoided this whole back and forth. Henry raised an eyebrow. Wow, casual Holocaust joke. Stay classy, L.A. Still, the dude folded, which meant Henry probably still overpaid. He fished around his pockets, pulled out a crumpled 15, and slapped it on the counter as a deposit. That's when something on the desk caught his eye. An old-school CRT monitor with a massive rear end, the kind that looked like it could double as a microwave. Below it sat a clunky tower, proudly stamped with a logo Henry recognized instantly. Stark Industries. Hey, he said, pointing. Is that a Stark system? What kind of CPU's it running? The man's eyes lit up like a kid on Christmas. Oh, someone knows their machines. This baby's running Intel's newest i4-86 processor, 4 megabytes of RAM, 120 megabytes hard drive, VGA display. Not CGA, not EGA, VGA. That's 256 colors. Full floppy support, 5.25 and 3.5-inch drives, plus a CD-ROM. Stark quality. You can't beat it. Dell, IBM, they can't compete. Stark's personal computers are top tier. Henry nodded slowly. Yeah, that's incredible. I'm overwhelmed. He said it so flatly, even the guy didn't notice the sarcasm. Truth was, for Henry, who'd lived through advanced alien tech, survived Soviet bunkers, and watched Tony Stark's future genius unfold in real time, this glorified microwave was little more than a toy. But hey, let the man have his... Henry couldn't stop staring at the relic of a computer on the counter, an honest-to-God 486. It was ancient by his standards, but instead of writing it off, his mind started spinning. Sure, he'd grown up on AAA games and cutting-edge tech from the 2020s, but that didn't mean the stuff from the 90s was worthless. Some games weren't about graphics or grind, they were about concept. Look at Tetris. Even on a toaster with buttons, that game slapped. Good design never aged. But a computer wasn't just a game console. Its real strength was in processing power, in connectivity, in the foundations of the digital age. All the stuff you could build on top of it. Back in his old life, Henry had been just another basement-dwelling nerd games, anime, pirated movies. A cliché. But now, with a Kryptonian brain riding shotgun, the idea of hacking didn't feel far-fetched. It felt inevitable. Superman might have let Batman play the genius role on the team, but the guy wasn't dumb. In Brainiac's intelligence ranking scale, Soups clocked in at a mind-bending level 12. The entire human race, by comparison, level 6, combined. Even Lex Luthor, his ultimate nemesis, barely kept pace intellectually. But Clark's raw power often overshadowed his brains, especially when Bruce was in the room, monologuing like Sherlock Holmes on a caffeine bender. Henry wasn't delusional, he knew he wasn't that Superman. Hell, his version had crash-landed in a Russian hellhole and got tortured for years. No loving Kent family, no sweet Kansas upbringing, just isolation and Soviet sadism. But still, if he had even half the brain power of Clark Kent, wasn't it smarter to develop the mind, not just the fists? You don't want to end up being the guy in red tights deflecting bullets for YouTube views. Or worse, some idiot people pointed going, "Look up in the sky. It's a dumbass with a cape." The key to hiding in plain sight wasn't punching everything into submission, it was blending in, building tools, understanding systems, especially in a world that was racing headfirst into the information age. If he waited for tech to catch up to his memories of the 2020s, he'd be sitting around for decades. But software, concepts, systems, those evolved year by year. You could build on them. Take the Y2K panic, for example. Banks had thrown mountains of cash at retired old coders just to keep the world from burning down because no one else understood the ancient systems their infrastructure ran on. All the new kids with slick degrees were useless when it came to legacy code. Old tech didn't die fast. If it worked, it stayed. So, standing in this dinky photo studio, eyeing a computer that most people wouldn't look twice at, Henry felt the gears in his head turning. He leaned over the counter. This thing have a modem? The greasy photo guy, his new best friend, apparently grinned. Modem? Nah, only connect to a couple college BBS boards anyway. But I use this beast to play Ultima 6. Way better than those dumb consoles. And it runs MS-DOS 4.01. Didn't bother with PC-DOS clunky as hell. I've got DOS/V running 2 color-coded file types. Real sexy stuff. Henry smirked. You ever hear of Linux? Lee what? Thought so. He chuckled. Right around now, somewhere, that Finnish kid should be about to start writing it. Open source was already bubbling under the surface college campuses, mostly. Too many engineers and students building niche tools for niche problems. Most commercial software didn't meet their needs, so they rolled their own. But up until now, they were all just making applications on top of existing systems, MS-DOS, Unix, whatever. Linux would be the game changer. An open-source operating system. A new foundation, free to build on. No surprise it started in universities. The motto was basically, as long as you're not selling it, build whatever the hell you want. Even later, when companies would slap a price tag on Linux servers, what they were really selling was service, not the OS itself. Henry couldn't stop himself from grinning. This was the beginning of something. Something massive. And he wanted it early. Forget waiting for hardware to catch up. This wasn't an RPG where you maxed out before leaving the tutorial zone. If you hung around too long grinding levels, you just get stuck. The only way to grow was to move. The photo guy must have noticed the glint in his eye. You like that rig? He asked. I got a buddy who can hook you up with one. Newest model. Fast. Not like those other jokers trying to unload junk stock. Henry was tempted. Radio Shack had some stuff, but most of it was hit or miss. If you wanted rare components, you either had to get lucky in a warehouse store or know a guy who knew a guy. Still, he looked around, eyebrows raised. This is a photo studio, right? Yup. And you also sell computers? Yup. Like you said, also. Why not make a buck if I can? You're sure you're not Jewish? I'm Italian. F*** Mussolini, the man said proudly. Henry shook his head. Thanks, but I gotta find a place to live first. Unless you can get me one I can use in my car. The man grinned. Hey, I can help you find an apartment too. Henry let out a long sigh. He stared at him, speechless. America prided itself on being a melting pot. But let's not kid ourselves, people here still sorted themselves into hierarchies, even among the so-called white crowd. Just being white didn't mean much when the descendants of the Mayflower looked down on anyone who didn't have tea with the queen. And so, people banded together. Ethnic groups formed tight-knit communities, complete with their own languages, rules, and invisible walls that kept outsiders out. You couldn't break into a conversation held entirely in rapid-fire Italian, for example. That alone told you how thick the bonds ran. After the photo shoot, more of a quick mugshot with lighting than anything artistic, the greasy old white guy at the photo studio pulled some strings. Next thing Henry knew, he was being introduced to a warm, mustached Italian man with a booming voice and a personality big enough to fill a stadium. Key detail, not Sicilian. That calmed Henry's nerves a bit. The last thing he needed was to end up face down in an alley with one less kidney. Though, to be fair, he was Kryptonian. Let him try. Still, it was better to have someone show him around than keep wandering LA like a clueless tourist. And thanks to Tom's paranoia rubbing off on him, Henry had picked up some useful tricks like reading micro-expressions and micro-sweats, tracking pulse rate, breathing changes, and eye movements. The usual, "is this guy lying to me?" toolkit. For now, though, the Italian guy just wanted to squeeze a few extra bucks out of him. Nothing sinister. Henry even caught the photo guy whispering to his friend about making back the cash he lost earlier, which, thanks to Henry's Kryptonian hearing, was basically the same as saying it directly to his face. Nice try, amateur. If these guys were trying to play him, they weren't doing it very well. It was nearing noon, and Henry's stomach reminded him it had a say in things too. In his world, skipping meals was never part of the plan. "Know any good places around here where we can talk and eat?" he asked. The Italian smiled knowingly. "You got any dietary restrictions? Any special habits?" Smart question. Ever since the hippie era, the U.S. had been flooded with all kinds of weird dietary philosophies. Veganism was the least complicated of the bunch. Religions, cults, and pseudo-health trends had made ordering lunch into a minefield. "No restrictions," Henry said. "As long as it's not people or poop, I'll eat it. But if the food sucks so bad it ruins my mood, that might affect our negotiations." The guy laughed, slapped Henry's shoulder, and twirled his impressive mustache. "We're not British, kid. You know what their best local dish is? French cuisine. Can you believe it? The bloody English got conquered in the kitchen. Us Italians? Our culinary history goes back to Caesar. The man conquered east to west for the sake of good food. Then came the Papal States. The Renaissance Italian cuisine is the best in the world, hands down. No contest. Caesar conquered half the world just to get better food?" Henry raised a brow. "I feel like that's not what my history teacher said." Still, the guy was charismatic as hell. Like a one-man Broadway show. Every sentence came with hand gestures, body language, passion. By the end of the spiel, Henry found himself nodding along, stomach growling louder. The restaurant was just 2 blocks away, no car needed. A small, family-owned Italian joint. Cozy, modest, and filled with the kind of mouth-watering aroma that could knock a man out cold. Inside, a husband and wife duo ran the kitchen and tables, both of them round-faced, round-bodied, and radiating warmth like a brick oven. They were busy lunch rush, but managed to squeeze Henry and the Italian guy into a quiet corner booth. After a rapid-fire Italian exchange between the host and his friend, the woman turned to Henry. "So what'll you have?" "Pesto linguine with clams, 1 pizza, and an arancini," he said. "Oh, and a bottle of white wine." The Italian and the woman both gave him a look half amused, half impressed. Henry shrugged. "Everything smells amazing. I want to try it all. Don't worry, I'll finish it. Big appetite." Then he turned to his new guide. "And hey, let's split the bill. I'm not about to eat you out of house and home." I got a chuckle. The woman gave a dramatic wave and grin before heading back to the kitchen, chatting in Italian with her husband as she went. Henry made a mental note. I should probably learn Italian someday. Hell, while he was at it, might as well add French, German, Swedish, Danish, Greek, Spanish, and Portuguese to the list. You heard all of them eventually in a city like LA. The Italian guy ordered a bowl of penne and leaned back with a smile. "If you've got the stomach for it, this place won't disappoint." A moment later, the woman returned with the wine, a crisp white from somewhere in Italy, and poured them each a glass. Henry sipped it slowly, letting it wash over his taste buds. It had a bright, dry finish and a sharpness that tickled the back of his tongue. Not bad. Kryptonian physiology meant he couldn't really get drunk, but that didn't mean he couldn't appreciate the pairing. In European cuisine, wine wasn't a luxury. It was part of the meal. Like the French concept of mariage, the idea that wine and food should complement each other perfectly. But food wasn't the only thing on the table. Henry set down his glass and looked at the briefcase resting beside the Italian man. I assume you brought info on the rentals? Easy there, kid. First, let me ask you a few things, the guy said, clearly slipping into real estate mode. Why are you in LA? How long are you staying? Got a budget? Willing to share a place? All fair questions. Henry nodded. I'm looking for opportunities in Hollywood. Could be a year, maybe longer. I'm not looking for anything fancy, definitely no Beverly Hills mansions. And as for roommates, sure, splitting rent would save him money, but it also came with risks. He had secrets to keep and cash to protect. The last thing he needed was a nosy roommate or worse, a would-be hookup with ulterior motives. I can afford to rent solo, he said finally. A bit of space would be nice. He took another sip of wine, feeling the warmth spread through his chest. Fabio, the not-so-slimy Italian real estate liaison Henry had picked up via a photo studio Dieter was, in fairness, not entirely out to fleece him. The guy actually had legit listings. After digging around in his leather briefcase, Fabio laid out several sheets on the table, spreading them out like tarot cards for a future yet to be determined. These ones here, he said, tapping a stack, are near Hollywood, but renting solo isn't cheap. Most people co-rent or sublet to save on costs. If you're open to roommates, there are more options. He motioned to the second stack. Now, these are a little farther out, near the edge of the city. There's one in Santa Monica top floor unit, right near the beach. You look out the window, and boom, the Pacific. Gorgeous view. Henry noticed that the listings were clearly divided into two piles. What's the difference between these groups? He asked. Fabio leaned in like he was letting Henry in on some big industry secret. One stack is property management. We handle everything rent, maintenance, complaints. You deal with us. The other stack? That's direct landlord rentals. We just connect you. After the lease, you talk to the owner. Or pay us extra to mediate if you really want. So that's why one pile was placed more prominently. It was all about recurring commission. With managed properties, the agency probably took a cut every month. The landlord listings? One-time commission, and that's it. Less money in the long run. Still, the fact that Fabio laid it all out so transparently earned him a few points in Henry's book. No sleight of hand. No sales speak. Just facts. As Henry skimmed through the printouts, their food arrived, first the pasta and baked penne, piping hot and drenched in the kind of aroma that made a man believe in God. The pizza and arancini were still in the works, but the smell already filled the room. The older Italian woman who had taken their order lingered beside the table, practically glowing with anticipation. Henry twirled a forkful of pasta and took a bite. Bam! The burst of garlic, olive oil, clam, and fresh basil hit him like a tidal wave. Rich, savory, and borderline illegal levels of delicious. His eyes went wide, and before he could stop himself, he made that classic Italian gesture, fingertips pressed together, hand exploding from his mouth. Buono, he exclaimed, half for show, half in the depths of his Kryptonian soul. The woman beamed, chattered excitedly in Italian, and waddled off to the kitchen with the kind of satisfaction only true culinary praise could bring. Henry blinked and turned to Fabio. Oh, what did she say? She said she's thrilled you liked it. She's starting on your other dishes right away. Made sense. Italian wasn't too far removed from other Indo-European languages. Structure and vocabulary could be guessed with a little mental acrobatics. Fabio's translation might not be word for word, but it was close enough. Henry didn't waste more time. He devoured the plate like he hadn't eaten in days, pausing only to sip the white wine and breathe. The wine itself seemed to change flavor with the food, less sharp, more full. Either the cook was a genius or the wine knew how to perform under pressure. Then came the pizza, thin, charred edges, molten cheese, proper sauce, and the arancini, golden, crisp fried rice balls stuffed with gooey mozzarella. Henry had never tried fried rice balls before, but one bite convinced him it was a crime against cuisine, that this wasn't globally mandatory. The rice was short grain, firm, and perfect for frying. The outer crust, crisp perfection. The inside, melty, cheesy heaven. He crushed the entire pizza by himself, an enormous one, too. By the time he was done, other patrons were staring. One guy dropped his fork. Another whispered to a friend. Kryptonian metabolism, Henry thought, unapologetically licking a bit of sauce from his finger. Don't hate me, because I'm superhuman. Between bites, he was still scanning the rental listings. Some had photos, interior shots, exterior views, even angles out the windows that showed sunlight falling in just right. Who took these pictures? Henry asked, impressed. You? Fabio chuckled. Nah, I get Giovanni to do them. He waits till I have a few listings, then goes out with a full roll of film and knocks it out. Guy's got an eye. Photos help a lot when we're showing places. Giovanni, of course. The pushy photo studio guy. Henry had to admit his camera work was damn good. The pictures balanced light and shadow with a surprising level of care. In this pre-Photoshop era, that took real skill. But that didn't mean Henry was ready to forgive the man's hard sell antics. Just remembering it made him want to laser eye a hole through the guy's neon sign. Still, back to the task at hand. He picked out a few listings. If I want to check these out, when could we go? Fabio flipped open a well-worn notebook. Some are managed properties, those we can see today. The others, I gotta call the owners. Earliest would be tomorrow. Then let's hit the ones we can see now. They settled on a plan. Fabio would drive them around, knocking out the viewable properties in one loop. The first place? Total bust. City center, low floor, right on a major road. Traffic noise bled in like the windows were made of paper. Horns, yelling, sirens. And don't even start on the building itself, old pipes, mystery gurgles, and questionable plumbing that made Henry's Kryptonian hearing twitch like a nervous tick. Hard pass. The Santa Monica unit looked better on paper. A top-floor unit near the beach, technically in a well-off neighborhood. Great view of the ocean, sure, but that also meant high humidity, salty air, and relentless sun exposure. Top floors in older buildings? They got hot in summer, cold in winter. And salt in the air meant metal corroded fast. Any iron or exposed steel left untreated would rust in weeks. He didn't need a physics lecture to know it. He could already smell the oxidation. Plus, Henry planned to use electronics. Lots of them. Computers, likely. This wasn't going to cut it. The view was nice. When Henry first landed in this world, he figured his standards for housing would be rock bottom. A roof for walls. And running water, what more could a Kryptonian in exile ask for? Turns out quite a lot. The more places he toured, the more he realized every apartment had something wrong with it. Some were too loud, others too damp, too dark, too sketchy. In hindsight, it made sense if a place was actually decent. It wouldn't have landed in Fabio's lower-tier real estate listings. Fabio, for all his charm and salesmanship, wasn't exactly operating at the top of the LA real estate food chain. He specialized in helping broke 20-somethings chase pipe dreams in Hollywood. Henry, on the other hand, had a little cash stashed away, and more importantly, secrets that made shared living a potential nightmare. So while he kept saying, "I'm not picky," the truth was, he was extremely picky. Not unlike those overly selective dating app users who claimed to be chill until they met someone who wasn't 6'2", with a law degree and a pet-friendly landlord. The good news? Fabio was a pro. He'd seen all kinds starving artists, down on their luck dreamers, borderline fugitives. So taking a few extra days to drive Henry all over LA didn't faze him. In the end, Henry settled on an older apartment building on the fringe of a Portuguese neighborhood. It wasn't high-end, but it had a few things going for it. The surrounding streets were quiet, there weren't any obvious drug dealers or working girls on the corners, and the place had a certain low-key charm. That said, areas dense with one ethnic group often came with an unspoken rule. If you weren't part of the tribe, you were on your own. But Henry's Kryptonian status gave him the confidence to ignore those politics. He just needed somewhere safe and semi-private. The landlord, as it turned out, lived on the ground floor. He insisted on meeting every tenant personally. No exceptions. If he didn't like your vibe, you didn't get the keys. Simple as that. Fabio gave Henry the rundown on the drive over. The landlord wasn't Portuguese, he was a longtime LA native whose family had been here since Hollywood's golden age. But now he was all that remained. Divorced, child in custody with grandma, and apparently halfway into his post-societal norms phase of life. When Henry met him, he immediately understood why Fabio had sounded hesitant. The guy was bald, short, well into his 60s, and wearing lipstick and eyeliner. Fabulous. Henry instantly understood why the landlord's kid preferred grandma. He tensed slightly, already mentally warming up his Kryptonian right hook, just in case this guy mistook him for someone interested in a different kind of lease. But to his surprise, the man Gary was all performance, no predation. His campy aesthetic didn't come with any sleazy undertones. No predatory leers. No awkward brushes. Just a man living his best life. Consequences be damned. Henry had seen weirder stuff back home, and that was before he woke up on this earth with Superman's DNA. Fabio, darling. Gary greeted the Italian with a cheek kiss-adjacent hug. You brought me another bright-eyed hopeful. Let me guess. Actor? Filmmaker? Failed magician seeking a second chance. Henry stayed cool, just looking to see what the big city's about. If I don't like it, I'll go back to Alaska. That wasn't a line. It was the honest truth. The moment life in LA got too crazy, what with mutants, metahumans, and the occasional cosmic death god, Henry had zero shame about retreating to the Alaskan wilderness and making money mining gold with his heat vision. Alaska, Gary repeated, circling Henry like he was sizing up a mannequin. You from the West? Henry caught the real meaning behind the question. West was Cold War code for, did you defect from the Soviet Union recently? Technically, sort of, but Henry wasn't about to explain interdimensional body hijacking from a Russian black site. So he just shook his head. Just Alaska. Gary seemed satisfied. All right then, Mr. Alaska. If you're serious about renting, come take a look. He grabbed a ring of keys off his belt and opened the stairwell door. Fabio gave Henry a reassuring smile. Don't worry. Gary's cool. A little eccentric but harmless. Henry smirked. As long as he's not trying to convert me into a drag show understudy, I think we'll be fine. He followed them up to the 3rd floor. The unit was on a corner, which meant 2 windows, decent lighting, and just enough space for someone who didn't want to go full hermit, but still valued privacy. Kitchen, fridge, bed, desk, closet, washer, and dryer check. Clean, well-kept, fully furnished. Everything a superhuman masquerading as a broke 20-something could ask for. Gary stood by the door, arms crossed dramatically. You probably already heard the basics from Fabio, but let me make this clear. No pets. Guests are fine, but this isn't a rave den. No blasting music, no drugs, no chaos. If you get high and start banging on doors, I will evict you. Personally and unceremoniously. Sounds fair. Henry had finally moved into Gary's apartment building. They say having an old man around is like having a treasure, and while Gary was only pushing 60 and not exactly someone you'd call wise, he did have one thing going for him. He was old-school Hollywood, not from some elite family of directors or A-listers, not the kind who could name-drop their way into a studio. But his family had lived near Hollywood since before it became Hollywood. And in a town where proximity often counts for more than pedigree, that gave Gary a kind of local expertise, or at least a convincing illusion of it. To Henry New Guy, partial amnesiac, and just Kryptonian enough to know he should be skeptical it was still useful. Even if half of what Gary said was probably made up, the old man liked to talk. More importantly, he was surprisingly flexible when it came to house rules. Once Henry explained he needed to make some minor kitchen upgrades, Gary just shrugged, so long as Henry didn't burn the building down. The reason? Simple. American kitchens weren't built for smoky cooking. Anything involving actual flavor, too smoky. And let's be honest, most restaurants in LA at the time, a tragedy. Now that he had his own place, Henry couldn't stop craving real food. He wasn't about to risk burning down his apartment, though, so he played it smart. With Gary's approval, Henry hit up the local hardware store, loaded his car with supplies, shut the door behind him, and with Kryptonian speed transformed the kitchen like it was a scene from Extreme Makeover, Intergalactic Edition. Once the work was done, He invited Gary up to inspect it. And to prove his culinary chops, Henry whipped up a proper 3D-ish, one-soup kind of meal. Westlake vinegar fish, pork, and broccoli in oyster sauce. By evening, the table was set, the dishes were hot, and Henry raised his glass. "Merry Christmas," he said. Gary clinked bottles with him. "Merry Christmas. You know, I really didn't expect this. I was starting to think you had a thing for my old ass, or that you were getting desperate. Gotta say up front, kid, I'm not that kind of guy." Henry rolled his eyes. "Shut up, you Irish bastard. Just because it's Christmas doesn't mean I won't knock you out and toss you in the snow. Landlord or not." Henry gave up and handed him a proper spoon and fork. "Try not to embarrass yourself." Gary took a bite and nodded, impressed. "First Christmas I've ever had with this type of food. Not bad." Henry was already working through his own plate. "I told you I needed to modify the kitchen for cooking. You didn't believe me. Said you'd make me tear it down if the results didn't impress. Well, today's Christmas, and I'm a man of my word. You could have just dropped off some leftovers in Tupperware, you know," Gary said. "Didn't expect a whole invite. Is this an Alaska thing?" Henry paused, then shrugged. "I'll keep that in mind next time. Honestly, I figured Christmas Eve was for couples and awkward office parties. Christmas Day's more of a family thing. Doesn't your son come visit?" Gary's expression soured like spoiled eggnog. "Maybe at my funeral. He and his sweet-hearted mother will probably be fighting over my will before the casket's even closed." Henry winced. "Should I say congrats on the divorce? Or sorry your family sucks?" Gary waved him off. "Don't say anything. Let me pretend this meal isn't depressing." Still chewing, he pointed his fork at the pork. "Damn, this stuff's good. I get it now. You made the kitchen work." "Told you," Henry said smugly. "You said you had questions. Ask away." Henry handed him another Heineken and waited for the first one to disappear. "Fabio said your grandfather used to work with Charlie Chaplin. Carried his camera or something. That true?" "Hell yes, it's true," Gary said, straightening up. "More real than the Queen's chastity. I've got photos of Grandpa and Chaplin together. Whole crew shot after filming The Kid in 21. Want me to show you sometime?" Gary, now a little buzzed, started to sound less like a flamboyant landlady and more like a grumpy old man, which, to Henry, was a welcome shift. "And it wasn't just my grandfather. My dad worked in one of the big 8 studios after the war. Lighting, set construction, grips, real crew work. Knew half the big names from back in the day." "What about you?" Henry asked, curious. "You ever work in the industry?" Gary puffed up with the pride of a forgotten supporting character. "Hell yeah, I was in props. Did a lot of work in the 70s. I even helped build sets with Harrison Ford before he was Harrison Ford. That guy and I were both doing carpentry. Then George Lucas, that blind son of a bitch, goes and picks him to play Han Solo. Left me behind like yesterday's news." He shook his head, pretending to be bitter. "So I said screw it. Came back, took over the building, and started renting to the next generation of dreamers." Henry blinked. "So this is the real-life version of I didn't become a star, so I inherited an apartment complex instead." The building wasn't tiny. 6 stories, 10 units per floor, each nearly 800 square feet. Some units were split, others rented whole. First floor had a laundromat and a small convenience store. The rest? Gary's property. No way that kind of real estate came from just working behind the scenes in film. Henry didn't press. He wasn't here to audit the guy's taxes. But now that he had Gary talking, "So," Henry said, keeping his tone casual, "with all that background, I bet you know a thing or two about how Hollywood really—" Gary didn't even try to play it humble. He smirked, leaned back in his chair, and said, "I know a thing or two. If you try to make it big, that's mostly luck. But if all you want is to survive in this town, yeah, I can help with that." "Well, that's refreshingly honest," Henry said, raising an eyebrow. "Aren't you supposed to give me a whole motivational speech right now? You know, talk about believing in myself, chasing dreams, yada, yada. What the hell would I gain from lying to you?" Gary snorted. "I'm not a talent agency. I don't get a cut of whatever you make. If I tell you I can make you a star and it doesn't happen, you'll just come back and break my jaw. I'm old, not stupid." Henry laughed. "Relax. I'm not trying to sign my soul away. I just figured I'd ask someone who knows the lay of the land." Gary waved a hand. "Then ask away." Henry leaned forward, arms on the table. I was flipping through the yellow pages and noticed there are two different actors guilds, one for film, one for TV and radio. If I wanted to get into acting just as a side thing, mind you, where do I even start? If you're serious about acting, step one is getting a decent agent, Gary said. A real one, not some dude with a fax machine and a headshot fetish. If you get lucky and find someone willing to invest in you, even better. Henry rolled his eyes. Right? Because this is totally a Hollywood rags-to-riches story. He was in a Marvel universe, for Krypton's sake. Even if he did win an Oscar, S.H.I.E.L.D. could still pull some classified red tape stunt to make his life hell. He wasn't worried about Thanos or Dormammu. Interdimensional threats were weirdly simple. Show up, punch things, save the day, or die trying. No, the real nightmare was Hydra. Bureaucratic cockroaches with tentacles in every government, media outlet, and tech firm. They couldn't kill him easily, but they could ruin him, and that would be worse. I'm not trying to be famous, Henry said. I just want to play a few extras, walk on a couple sets, see what Hollywood is like from the inside. Maybe meet a few celebrities so I can one day sit in a rocking chair and say, I met so-and-so before they overdosed in a hot tub. Gary stared at him. You serious? Dead serious. Huh. The old man scratched his shiny scalp, trying to make sense of it. I've heard weirder reasons, I guess. Gary was old enough to have seen the dark side of Hollywood and not the fun, TMZ side. He'd seen the real rot. Drug-fueled parties, predators in tuxedos, the whole machine devouring bright-eyed kids with dreams of stardom. Hell, groupies in rock and roll at least got free concert tickets. In Tinseltown, you were lucky if you got a call back after the casting couch. Gary squinted. You sure you're not just looking to bang a few actresses? Henry's expression twisted in horror. Jesus, no. I'm here to experience life, not catch every STD in the California zip code. It wasn't just paranoia. This was the early 90s, and HIV was still an incurable death sentence. Add in syphilis, gonorrhea, and whatever else was floating around backstage, and you had yourself a real-life horror movie. Gary actually looked impressed. Well, you've got more sense than most of the starry-eyed idiots that wander through this town. Henry gave a half-smile. I'm not interested in selling my dignity for a casting call. Just want to be in the background, keep my head down, see how the sausage gets made. Gary nodded slowly. You got rent money? That came out a little harsh. So he added, just saying we agreed this was long-term. If you miss a payment, I don't care how nice your kitchen smells. You'll be sleeping on the curb. Henry smirked. No worries. I'm not broke, and I don't do drugs. You'll get your money. All right then, Gary said. If you're just trying to blend in and catch the vibe of the place, you've got two ways to go. One, you find an agent. They'll hunt down roles for you, real ones, not just man number 3 standing in line. Some of those roles never even hit the public listings. But agents take a cut, and trust me, they'll keep trying to push you toward bigger gigs whether you want them or not. That's how they get paid. Henry nodded. Makes sense. Gary went on. Second option, join the union. Either way, it's a good idea if you plan to do any acting for real. Even agents will tell you to get your union card eventually. I've heard you can get gigs without an agent if you're in the union, Henry said. You can, Gary replied. But those gigs, well, let's just say they're not exactly Oscar bait. Don't let the studio numbers fool you. Only about 50 movies a year make it to major theaters. But Hollywood pumps out over 700 films annually. Henry raised his brows. Wait, what? Gary grinned. You heard me. Most of them are low-budget, straight-to-video garbage. Half are made by wannabe auteurs who think they're the next Scorsese, but can't even afford decent lighting. And a bunch of those movies are just made to sell off international rights, tax shelters, whatever. Unless those producers have a deal with a big agency, like CAA, which does happen, they'll avoid agents entirely. Agents drive up costs. And when your movie's being filmed in a garage on a budget of $20 and a pizza coupon, you're not looking to spend extra. And those guys use the union to find actors? Exactly. They'll post casting calls to the guild directly. If you're a card-carrying member, you'll get notified. It's better than nothing, but don't expect glamorous roles. It's mostly background stuff, walk-ons, fake commercials. You'll get paid, though, and not get scammed, which is more than I can say for Craigslist. Henry leaned back in his chair, mulling it over. He didn't need fame. He didn't want to be on talk shows or plastered on magazine covers. All he wanted was a way to exist in this world, stay under the radar, and maybe leverage a few Hollywood connections later on when things inevitably got weird. Because this was the Marvel Universe. Weird was coming. One way or another, being a nobody might be the Gary took another swig of beer, cleared his throat, and kept going. Why just said that's mostly for film, TV and radio? Even simpler. Bigger volume, smaller circle. Henry leaned in, intrigued. Most of the time, Gary explained, all the actors' leads, extras, even background nobodies are handled in-house by the production company or the agencies backing the main cast. So, if you're hoping to land a TV gig through union listings, forget it. Henry raised an eyebrow. Then, how do you even get in? You can still go to the big talent agencies and get on their roster. They've always got some poor intern handling the grunt work, keeping tabs on open slots for background actors, filling bodies in crowd scenes. You never know when your mug might end up behind someone more famous. There's actually an agent for that. Gary chuckled. Nah, it's not one person's job. Usually falls to the rookies. Interns. Whoever's lowest on the totem pole. Still, those extras are usually attached to a real agent on paper, because a lot of productions have specific needs. He ticked the list off on his fingers. Age range, gender, height, weight, hair color, ethnicity. You need a platoon of background soldiers? You're not casting scrawny kids who look like they'll pass out holding a gun. Ah, Henry said, connecting the dots. So even extras get filtered like that? Damn right. When casting puts out a request, the agency filters their stable and pitches the closest matches. If you're lucky and fit the type, you might land a gig in a big-budget flick. Of course, those are usually non-speaking parts. Set dressing, living wallpaper. And I'm fine with that, Henry said, swishing the beer around in his mouth before taking another sip. But Gary suddenly lowered his voice and leaned in, eyes narrowed. Can I ask you something? Off the record. Henry blinked. Shoot, you one of those people with special abilities? There was a pause. You mean a mutant? Henry asked, brows rising. Then, catching on, he quickly added, I'm not. Which, technically, wasn't a lie. He wasn't a mutant. He was a Kryptonian. Totally different species. Gary gave him a long look. Just wondering. Why? Would it matter? Hollywood discriminate. Gary scoffed. No. Opposite, actually. If you've got powers they can use, they'll love you for it. Sure, some mutants look weird. Maybe only fit for horror or fantasy flicks. But if your abilities are practical, man, the studios will fall over themselves to hire you. He leaned back, eyes scanning the ceiling like he was rifling through memories. There's this one guy, Noel Mutant, probably, can mold wood like it's clay. He's a sculptor, works props and set design for major blockbusters. The guy's a freaking wizard. Directors love him because he can reshape or fix props on the fly. No tools, no waiting, just bam done. Henry blinked. And people are okay with that? They're not. Scared their jobs will get replaced. Gary snorted. Please. Like that's easy. Powers like his are 1 in a million. You think there's a whole army of woodwarpers waiting to take over set design? Nah. Besides, this is Hollywood. It's all about value. If you're not saving money for producers or delivering exactly what the director wants, you're useless mutant or not. But if you're saving time and money, if you can nail a shot in 1 take instead of 20. He raised a hand in mock solemnity. Hell, you could be a goddamn Martian. They'll still write you a 6-figure check. Henry tilted his beer, thinking, so being a Kryptonian could actually be useful on set? It was a weird thought. He hadn't really planned on turning his powers into a side hustle, but it did open some doors he hadn't considered before. And now that he thought about it, something else fell off. People in this world didn't seem as paranoid about mutants as he expected. Sure, there were rumors and stories. The X-Men were active. Magneto and his Brotherhood had made headlines. But there wasn't that boiling hate you'd expect. No anti-mutant legislation. No sentinels patrolling the skies. Was it just a calmer moment before everything went to hell? Or was this world, this version of the Marvel Universe, a little more tolerant? Hard to say. Gary didn't seem to notice Henry drifting into thought. Or maybe he did and just kept rolling with it. Now, if you don't have powers, then it comes down to nerve and skills. Henry snapped back. You mean like stunt work? Exactly. Stuntmen are the backbone of action movies. Car chases, explosions, getting punched through a window, those aren't CGI, kid. Someone actually does that stuff. Henry nodded slowly. That might work. He could take a hit. He could fall from insane heights. Hell, he could probably walk out of a building collapse and only complain about the dust in his hair. The only tricky part was not overdoing it. If he sold a hit too realistically or didn't sell it at all, people might start asking questions. Especially if he no-sells a punch from some juiced-up actor and walks away without a scratch. But if he picked his stunts carefully, he could make a career out of this. 1 foot in Hollywood, 1 foot in the shadows. Are there stunt agents? He asked. No dedicated agencies, Gary said. Most of it's word of mouth. You do one job, leave an impression, and people start passing your name around. You can also mention your stunt skills when registering with a union or an agency. But it's a small circle, you'll need someone to vouch for you. Henry nodded, mind spinning. Union gig. Background actor. Maybe stunt work. Use his powers just enough to make a living, but not enough to raise red flags. No fame. No headlines. Just exist. For now, that was enough. By the time they finished the last of the beer, Henry had more clarity about his options, but also more questions. The path ahead wasn't exactly clear. It twisted and forked in ways he hadn't expected, but it was a path. And for a Kryptonian, trying to keep a low profile in a superpowered world, that was somehow, without even noticing, Henry had stumbled his way into 1991. He didn't even remember the new year starting. After finally settling into his new place, life had been a blur, one jam-packed task after another. No breaks, no downtime, just the relentless grind of carving out a life in a city that chewed up dreams and spat them back out as cautionary tales. He'd hit up both acting unions, just like Gary suggested. And just as Gary warned, the results were underwhelming. The Screen Actors Guild had a handful of scraps, mostly low-budget productions run by first-time directors with shoestring funds. Half of them wanted their lead actors to pay for the privilege of starring. Henry couldn't tell if it was indie filmmaking or some Hollywood-flavored scam. The American Federation of Television and Radio Artists was worse. No listings, no auditions, just a blunt, go find an agency from the staff at the front desk. You couldn't stumble into gigs there. You needed connections. Still, Henry wasn't here to chase stardom. He just wanted a foot in the door. He made himself a straightforward actor resume, printed out headshots and full-body stills, then mailed packets off to any production that seemed remotely interested in a warm body to stand in the background. That meant dealing with Giovanni again, the oily Italian guy who ran the local photo studio. He developed another batch of passport-style photos, plus a set of basic full-body shots. Gary had told him not to overdo it. Casting directors didn't want glamour. They wanted proportions. Clean, plain photos that showed what you looked like, period. Henry had 100 sets printed. For photos per set, $300 in total. A deal that nearly brought tears to Giovanni's overworked, pizza-stained eyes. Still, Henry had one more ask: a computer. Specifically, a Starkite 486 personal computer, complete with keyboard, CRT monitor, and a bleeding-edge 28.8 kbps modem. Yeah, you read that right. Modem. Mouse. Not standard. And even if you had one, using it felt like trying to draw with a soap bar. If you know, you know. The reason he went to Giovanni wasn't just the photo work, it was access. Most electronic stores in LA only stocked iMachines. DIY PC building wasn't common yet. And if you wanted Stark Industries hardware, you needed connections, especially the high-end boutique gear. Giovanni claimed he had a supplier and promised delivery in 2 weeks. Henry wasn't holding his breath. Still, his trip to the electronics store wasn't a total bust. He walked out with a decent TV set, a VCR, and a telephone answering machine. He even snagged a vinyl record player and a sizable collection of vinyls for a shockingly low price. Tapes were king now, CDs were rising, and vinyl was considered trash. Nobody knew it had come back in a couple decades like some kind of hipster phoenix. The answering machine was practical. Henry didn't want to miss calls. He considered getting a mobile phone, but one look at the brick-sized monstrosities of the era had him backing away like it was radioactive. The thing looked like it belonged in a Batman utility belt. Besides, pagers and home answering machines were still the standard. He could live with that. As for the TV and VCR, Henry used them to dig into the film history of this world, classic movies, Golden Age legends, whatever he could get his hands on. This was a pre-streaming world, after all. No binging shows, no anime rabbit holes. Just good old-fashioned cinema, one tape at a time. But most of his time, that was spent somewhere else entirely. The Los Angeles Public Library. It started as curiosity, then became obsession. Everyone says perspective is everything. That what you know defines how far you can go. Henry had come from a world of red flags and state-controlled textbooks. Dropping into this version of America, the Marvel-flavored one, was like being tossed into a shotgun blast of freedom, madness, and mystery. And he was woefully underprepared. Sure, his old world's education system gave him a few nuggets of useful knowledge. But most of it, garbage. Useless trivia. He couldn't rely on any of it if he wanted to understand this new real lit or survive in it. So he leaned on his Kryptonian advantage. A brain built for optimization. A memory that never forgot. A mind that processed data like a supercomputer and could learn at speeds that would give Einstein an existential crisis. He wasn't just going to punch things. That would be a waste. It'd be like buying a high-end gaming rig, prepped to run AAA games at max settings, and using it to browse Facebook and pirate old sitcoms. No, he had to put it to work. Even if he didn't have Tony Stark's resources or Bruce Banner's lab, he could still evolve. Learn. Adapt. If he was going to survive in a world full of Hydra, S.H.I.E.L.D., and cosmic-level threats, he needed more than fists. He needed to think smarter. So Henry didn't just focus on tech. He read everything. Science, history, engineering, literature, philosophy, art. He cleared the public sections of the L.A. library like a human Roomba with a Ph.D. Sure, there were restricted sections, rare first editions, ancient manuscripts, but those were just collector items, not secret grimoires or forbidden knowledge. He didn't bother sneaking in. Most of the time, he just stood in front of a shelf, made sure nobody was looking, and scanned it at inhuman speed. Pages turned with a flick of his thumb. One book down. Next. Repeat. Sometimes he slowed down to avoid suspicion. Once or twice, he even got flagged by staff his reading habits looked off. But after a few rounds of pick any page, I'll recite it, the librarians stopped asking questions. He became known as that weird guy who reads too fast. Which, honestly, in this world, not the weirdest thing. Within 2 months, Henry had absorbed every single accessible book, magazine, and archived newspaper the library had. That included the latest scientific journals. Armed with those and his pre-existing knowledge of the next 30 years from his old Earth, he began to mentally map out a personal roadmap of innovation. Was he a Tony Stark? No. But could he develop near-future tech that looked like Stark magic in the early 90s? Absolutely. He didn't claim to master every corner of human science, but he understood most of it. Enough to recreate future technologies and maybe even nudge this world's tech tree ahead of schedule. Still, the biggest revelation wasn't technological. It was societal. This world wasn't quite like the one he remembered from the comics. Mutants existed, yes, but they weren't being hunted. Not yet. The Brotherhood and X-Men were active, but their conflicts mostly stayed under the radar or among themselves. No giant Sentinel programs. No Mutant Registration Act. No government-mandated purges. Why? Because the country's main focus wasn't on mutants. It was still stuck in the middle of racial tensions, black and white, civil rights, systemic inequality. Ever since Martin Luther King Jr., America's biggest cultural fault line had been race. Mutants were still a side concern. For now, Henry had a bad feeling that would change eventually. Someone, someday, would realize they could distract the masses from systemic issues by turning mutants into scapegoats. All it'd take was one visionary with a PR team and a thirst for control. But for now, he had time. Time to learn. Time to prepare. Time to build something for himself quietly, carefully before this world spun off into chaos. Spring had arrived in Los Angeles, and the beach was back to being a postcard fantasy. Bikini-clad sunseekers lounged in the sand. Tanned, chiseled dudes flexed like walking steroid ads, their muscles glistening with baby oil and questionable choices. The air was thick with heat, hormones, and the distant whir of opportunity. For Henry, spring wasn't just a change in the weather, it was a shift in momentum. 2 weeks after registering with the actors' unions, he finally landed his first job. One scene, 0 lines. If it even made the final cut, it'd be a blink-and-you-miss-it moment. Still, it was something. He spent an entire day on set. 8 hours, paid the minimum union wage of $10 an hour. No overtime, no stunt work, just pure, entry-level Hollywood. Lunch was on the house, no lavish buffet, of course. Just a box combo, burger, fries, and a choice of soda or bitter coffee. Still, for a small-time shoot, it wasn't bad. The scene he filmed? Done in under 15 minutes. But with setup, lighting, and endless reshoots, that quarter hour dragged into an hour. And when you weren't in front of the camera, you were expected to help. Small productions ran lean. Everyone pulled double duty. So when the gaffer needed an extra set of hands, or the director's assistant needed props lugged across the set, guess who got volunteered? That's right, the nameless background extras. Forget what people said about American workplace boundaries. Whether you were in Burbank, knowing how to read the room and play the game mattered. A smile and a willingness to do grunt work could be the difference between getting rehired or never getting the call again. People think America doesn't grind. Henry knew better. Even those velvet sofa social climbers clawing their way into fame through shady casting sessions were still hustling, just a different kind of hustle. Was Henry expecting to see his scene on the big screen? Hell no. The whole shoot felt more like a con job to impress investors than an actual production. The producers barely hid their disinterest, the director phoned it in, and the crew looked ready to unionize and protest. If not for the union contract, Henry might not have even gotten paid. Still, that one day on set, it was a door. Not wide open, but cracked. And once you were on the other side, things got easier. Soon, Henry was getting more calls. One-day gigs, mostly. No lines, no fame. But each one meant another paycheck, another line on his resume. For most people, living like this meant picking up side jobs to survive. The rent alone would kill you if the acting gigs didn't. Henry? He was fine. Kryptonian perks, after all. On his days off, he alternated between the Los Angeles Public Library, Caltech's archives, and the Blockbuster near his place. He wasn't just binging classics anymore. He'd added cult B-movies to the mix, cheesy, weird, sometimes brilliant in all the wrong ways. Occasionally, he'd even catch a flick in theaters. Nothing beat the big screen for soaking up style and narrative. But most of his time spent at home, in front of a custom-rigged StarTech i4-86 PC. This wasn't just Henry messing around on forums or writing basic programs. He wasn't content being a power user. He was rebuilding computing from the ground up. Using his superhuman processing ability and memory, Henry began writing his own OS, something lean, efficient, and brutally optimized to squeeze every ounce of power from the i4-86 architecture. He referenced Linux, reverse-engineered existing shell environments, built custom compilers, rewrote libraries. He didn't just want control of the machine, he wanted it to submit. And while the early 90s were filled with edgy hackers writing worms and boot sector viruses to ruin people's systems, Henry had different ideas. He wasn't in it to destroy. He wanted access. So he started scanning IP ranges. When a system responded, he slipped in a silent worm, opened a backdoor, and watched. Not for malice, for knowledge. He even developed custom encryption protocols to cloak his movements and built isolated runtime environments inside compromised systems, basically his own hidden ecosystem within other machines. He wasn't a virus. He was a parasite, quiet, invisible, everywhere. And no, his i4-86 couldn't pull off something like the NSA's PRISM program. Not yet. But with time, maybe. Kryptonian subtlety offline, full-blown chaos god online. By all modern definitions, Henry was committing dozens of felonies. Hacking government servers, sniffing data, building quiet fail-safes in major agency systems. But he had rules. No stealing. No data leaks. No financial harm. Just eyes in the dark. Just understanding. That was his excuse, anyway. Still, modems in this era were delicate beasts. Too much use. They overheated. Thunderstorms? A voltage spike could fry the whole thing. And don't even get started on ISPs playing dumb when your connection randomly dropped. Henry, ever the tinkerer, decided enough was enough. He dove into electrical engineering, looking to optimize and bulletproof his hardware. This was, after all, the age of American industrial dominance. Spare components weren't hard to come by: resistors, capacitors, logic chips. If guys like Jobs could build Apple in a garage, Henry could certainly trick out a modem. With his heat vision and Kryptonian micromanipulation, soldering was a joke. His steady hands made circuit adjustments like threading a needle in zero-G. Eventually, he started wondering, could I build my own chips? The X86-80486 had a manufacturing process between 1 micrometer and 0.6 micrometers, too small for purely manual construction. But with a few tools, some clever shortcuts, not impossible. Sure, it wouldn't be cost-effective, and mass production was out of the question. But a handmade chip, customized for his personal OS? Yeah, he could do that. And that's when he realized his mind wasn't just a powerful tool, it was designed to innovate. He didn't need to memorize existing schematics. When he pictured a result, the entire process unfolded in his head. Step by step, no blueprint needed. If he had access to arc reactor schematics, he could probably cook up a Mark I suit in a garage with duct tape and a car battery. But for now, he had something better: momentum. The acting gigs were picking up too. Still no major roles. Still the guy who got punched, fell through a table, or stood behind the lead in a crowd shot. But that's what made him stand out. He wasn't afraid to get messy, to look stupid, to fall flat literally. He didn't care about image. He was a young white guy with a strong chin and no ego. And in a town where everyone was trying to be the next Brad Pitt, that made him weirdly. Spring mornings in Los Angeles had their own kind of magic: sunlight, soft and golden, just warm enough to push back the lingering bite of early season chill. Henry drove with the windows down, one arm resting casually along the open edge of the car door. The streets were surprisingly calm. LA's infamous traffic didn't really hit full swing until rush hour, which gave him time to cruise leisurely toward the Screen Actors Guild office. Breakfast joints weren't fully open, yet most cafes and fast food places were still prepping. If you wanted something to eat this early, your best bet was one of the street vendors already set up at intersections or gas stations. And after 3 months in the city, Henry, thanks to his hypersensitive Kryptonian nose and a solid work ethic, had already scoped out most of the hidden gems tucked across greater Los Angeles. He'd learned not to underestimate the food carts. Sure, they weren't glamorous, and half the vendors probably didn't have the paperwork to be here legally, but some of these folks were culinary warlocks with recipes from back home that could knock your taste buds into orbit. And Henry? He didn't give a damn about immigration status or Michelin stars. Good food was good food. As for sanitation, well, Kryptonian digestion was weird. Unless he actually saw something horrific like raw meat being chopped with a tire iron or someone prepping tacos shirtless over a garbage can, he was fine. You could pour him a shot of filtered Ganges water and he'd gulp it like spring water. But show him a cockroach crawling over an unwashed cutting board? Instant gag reflex. He wasn't that invincible. The place that had made the cut this morning? A weather-beaten taco truck with a weathered old señora and a killer recipe for spicy carne asada breakfast burritos. 3 burritos, blazing with enough chili to offend half of Southern California, were tucked neatly into his passenger seat. And for coffee, none of that sugar syrup swill from Starbucks. Henry had a standing deal with Paul, a French expat who ran an obscure cafe and was one of the few people in LA with access to small-batch estate roasted beans. Paul didn't do American-style breakfast, just croissants, baguettes, and a few pastries, but Henry came for the coffee anyway. Today, he'd ordered 2. One for him, one for someone else. Of course, he wouldn't be a monster and eat his burritos inside Paul's cafe. That would be rude. Especially since the old man took his coffee as seriously as the French take war and wine. So here he was, back in his parked car outside the Screen Actors Guild, sun on his face, burrito in one hand, and a worn paperback copy of Shakespeare's Julius Caesar in the other. He read fast, superhuman fast, but literature wasn't just about speed. It was about texture, cadence, human emotion. The poetry of grief, betrayal, ambition, things that no superbrain could truly compress into raw data. Reading Shakespeare, cooking a proper meal, these were sacred acts. No matter how powerful he was, some things required patience. Waiting for a roux to brown or a monologue to breathe weren't things you could fast forward through. He was mid-soliloquy. Cowards die many times before their deaths. When a loud rap against the windshield snapped him back to the real world. The window was already down, so whoever had knocked hadn't even tried to tap the side. They'd gone right for the front glass. Henry glanced up. "Morning, Mary Ann," he said with a grin. "Is that Chanel NM on your lips today?" "Huh, wrong again, handsome. It's N12. Took me 3 months and a miracle to find a shade that actually works for me." The woman standing outside was probably in her 50s, laugh lines around her eyes, a sharp sense of style, and the kind of confidence that made men in their 20s lean in a little too close. Henry reached over to the passenger seat and handed her the second coffee. Paul's latest roast. Black. Strong enough to put a dead man in a good mood. "Oh, bless you," Mary Ann said, taking a dramatic sip. "If I don't get caffeine in me before 9 a.m., I basically become Satan in heels." She led the way toward the front doors of the Guild building, Henry falling in beside her. "Checking for new casting calls again?" she asked, already knowing the answer. "Of course. Any new productions pop up yesterday?" "Sadly, no. But rumor is the Big 8 are gearing up for some heavy shoots. You should really think about getting a proper agent." Marianne worked the front desk at the Screen Actors Guild, filed the paperwork, kept the casting bulletin board updated, and acted as an unofficial gatekeeper to half the unrepresented actors in Los Angeles. Henry had been dropping by daily ever since he arrived in town, and somewhere along the line, a free coffee had turned into a morning ritual. Marian didn't play favorites, but for Henry, she made an exception. "Any word back on the casting sheets I submitted?" Henry asked, hopeful. She winced dramatically, then gave him a pout. "Sorry, sweetheart. If anyone had reached out about you, I'd be blowing up your phone." Radio silence. They stepped inside, and Henry glanced up at the bulletin board. Nothing new. Exactly as Mary Ann had said. Not that he didn't believe her, but building rapport had started with him checking that board religiously. Back then, Mary Ann had just been a curious woman wondering who the handsome kid was reading War and Peace between call sheets. Now, she was practically his morning co-conspirator. Behind a front desk, Mary Ann started sorting through her planner and paperwork. Then she paused. "Huh, aren't you supposed to be on set today?" Henry checked the time and smirked. "Yeah, but it's a street scene. They're filming just a few blocks away. I've got time." This new job was part of a bigger production, well, bigger by B-movie standards. It was destined to go straight to VHS shelves in a Blockbuster somewhere in Nebraska, but it was still more organized than the backyard film sets he'd been on before. And unlike the last time, he was officially on the call sheet. Since the location was close, he'd parked at the Guild to avoid LA's hellspawn, known as meter parking. From here, he could just walk to set at his own pace. He didn't even use super speed. Henry strolled through the city streets at a lazy, human pace, burrito-fueled, caffeinated, and oddly content. He had no name in the industry, no agent, no lines in any of his scenes. But he had a reputation. The kid who showed up on time, didn't complain, didn't mind getting thrown through breakaway tables, and never said no to a job. He was still a background extra. But he was an employed background extra. And in this town, that was enough. Henry strolled onto the film, set at a relaxed pace, only to find absolute chaos unfolding around him. This wasn't the usual morning hustle he'd come to expect. Normally, at this early hour, crew members would be setting up shots, actors would be in makeup chairs, and costumers would be herding people into outfits for the day's scenes. Makeup went in priority order. Leads first, then supporting roles, and finally the background extras like him. But right now, no one was in makeup. No one was getting dressed. Instead, nearly the entire crew was gathered around the main filming location, all talking over each other, shouting in frustration. Henry spotted a few other extras, already on standby and clearly watching the drama unfold. "What's going on?" he asked, walking up with a half-empty coffee in hand. "I thought today was a big action sequence." "It is," one of the guys replied, not taking his eyes off the argument ahead. "That's the problem." "What do you mean?" "The stunt team just walked. Said the safety prep was garbage and they're not doing the scene." Henry blinked. "Wait, they can do that." Another extra, clearly a veteran of the Hollywood grind, gave him a sideways look. "You must be new." "Well, I got here Christmas last year. So yeah, pretty new." The guy who had been gearing up for a snarky remark hesitated, then shrugged. "Huh, fair enough." A third man older, with a bit of a teacherly vibe, stepped in to explain. "Stunt performers usually have similar contracts to ours. Same base clauses, same union protections. But they've got one extra line that matters a lot in situations like this." "Which is?" Henry asked. "They have the right to refuse a stunt if they think safety protocols aren't sufficient. Full stop. No penalty, no questions." "Seriously?" Henry said. "What? They couldn't write a more airtight contract. This is America, right? I've seen lawyers make poodles sign prenups more ironclad than that." The older man chuckled. "It makes sense if you think about it. These people risk their lives for a paycheck. If the studio cuts corners to save money on safety and someone gets hurt, the lawsuit would be massive. And trust me, someone on the team will testify." He went on. "Plus, you can't force someone to do a dangerous stunt if they're mentally not in it. That's a fast track to real accidents. You think anyone wants blood on their hands just to save a few bucks?" Henry nodded. It added up. After all, this was Hollywood where everything was fake except the danger. Sure, they wanted stunts to look real, but nobody was actually out here committing manslaughter for the sake of cinema. Not unless they wanted to trade Oscars for orange jumpsuits. At least, that was the theory. In practice, Henry had a sneaking suspicion that Hollywood had pulled off a few real horrors in the name of movie magic, just not enough to become the norm. Yet, as Henry watched, the situation ahead reached a breaking point. The lead stunt double-dressed in the same weathered denim jacket as the film star whipped it off and flung it at the director's face before storming off set. The set went quiet for a beat. Then all hell broke loose. The producer, a balding man in a cheap suit trying his best to look like someone important, turned beet red and began shouting at the director. "If this shoot's dead, we go back to the soundstage. I'm not signing off on another goddamn permit extension. You know how much it costs to shut down a city street." The director, fuming, turned and began unloading on both the producer and the stunt coordinator. "I'm not compromising on this scene. This is the money shot, the climax of the entire damn movie. I don't want plastic dummies and CGI fireballs. I want real explosions and real people in the frame. If you won't authorize another shoot day, then fine, just let me film what I came here to film today. I don't care who steps in. I'm not filling my final cut with rubber mannequins and sparklers." Meanwhile, the stunt coordinator, caught squarely between a furious director and a budget-strangled producer, looked like he'd rather vanish into the concrete. Most of his team were gear haulers and prop handlers, not trained performers. The only guy he had who could actually do the big stunt had just pieced out in a blaze of denim and middle fingers. Normally, this guy's crew specialized in disposable thug roles, goons who took a punch, flipped over a railing, or got squibbed with fake blood to simulate a gunshot. Occasionally, they'd rig a prosthetic limb to explode or yank someone backward through a glass pane with a harness. But today's shoot? Car crashes, explosions, pyro-heavy chaos. This was the kind of job that, if pulled off correctly, could seriously raise their profile. A stunt team that delivered on a big set piece could start getting bigger and better gigs. Hollywood didn't reward ambition. It rewarded proven experience. If you couldn't point to the last time you nailed a complex scene, no one cared what you said you could do. They had a shot, a real shot, and now it was falling apart. The stunt coordinator's face turned blotchy with frustration. He'd worked hard to get the director to approve their plan, collaborated with the effect guys, rehearsed every beat, and now it was all going to hell because one guy bailed. And it wasn't like he had stuntmen sitting around on call, waiting to be summoned. Most of his team were booked solid on other sets. Nobody was just lounging around at home, twiddling their thumbs and praying the phone would ring. Then, out of desperation, he had an idea. What if? The coordinator began, cautiously. What if we just let the lead actor do the stunt himself? We could pitch it as all stunts performed by the actor himself in the marketing. Silence. Then, instantly, he was swarmed metaphorically by verbal gunfire from the director and producer. The suggestion was dead on arrival. And so, the grizzled stunt coordinator, a guy who'd been in the game long enough to know better, shrank under the pressure, looking like a beaten dog, shoulders hunched, trying not to flinch with every beneath all the glitz and glamour of Hollywood. The machine that actually powered the entertainment industry was built on a brutal mix of money, hierarchy, and survival of the fittest politics. You could be a black belt, an amateur boxing champ, and still get reamed out like a rookie intern. Just ask the stunt coordinator currently getting yelled like a dog in front of half the crew. Henry watched from the sidelines as the poor guy Channing. His name was took a verbal beatdown from both the director and the producer, neither of whom had any chill left to spare. The director wanted his explosive climax shot. The producer didn't want to spend a dime more on permits. Channing? He just wanted to avoid getting sued or fired. Eventually, even the furious director realized he had to cut Channing loose at least long enough to hunt down a warm body willing to do the stunt. Otherwise, the entire shoot was going to collapse. It wasn't about blame. No one really cared who screwed up. They just needed a scapegoat to scream at so they could pretend it wasn't their fault. And Channing knew exactly how this worked. Even though he was the team leader, technically a small business owner contracted by the studio, he still had to eat it. Because in Hollywood, if you pissed off a producer or a director, your team stopped getting jobs. End of story. Which is why, 30 minutes and a half dozen unanswered phone calls later, Channing looked ready to either have a stroke or throw himself off the set scaffolding. That's when someone tapped on the glass of the phone booth. "Can I help you?" Channing snapped. "If you're looking to use the phone, find another booth. I'm working here." "Hey, easy there," said Henry, giving him a lopsided grin. "I'm just here to offer a solution, not steal your quarters." Channing narrowed his eyes at the guy. He recognized him kinda. Tall kid, scruffy, mid-20s maybe, always in the background of crowd scenes. Never said much. "Look," Henry said, "if you really can't find anyone, give me a shot at it." You? Channing blinked, genuinely unsure if this was a prank. "Yeah, I know I'm just background filler, but I've got a solid build, no fear of heights or fire, and I know the scene. All I'm asking is a chance to prove I can do it." Channing hung up the phone, stepped out of the booth, and gave Henry a once-over. Kid was maybe an inch taller than their lead actor, decent proportions, right skin tone, too. Could pass on camera if they didn't do a close-up. "Don't call me boss," Channing said finally. "You're not on my team. Not yet. Name's Channing. Henry. Henry Brown." Channing crossed his arms. "Got any stunt experience, Mr. Brown?" "Nope. Just extra work." "Union member?" "Yep. Registered with the Screen Actors Guild." Channing grunted. That helped. Unionman insurance, and at least a sliver of liability coverage. "And what exactly makes you think you can do the stunt?" Henry shrugged casually. "The scene's just a car-to-car leap, right? One vehicle explodes. The lead jumps to another one mid-drive. I say let me do a dry run first. Car's parked. No pyrotechnics. Just see if I can make the jump. And if that works, then try it with the cars moving. Slow speed. Still no explosions. Once you and the director are convinced, we go full take with all the effects." Henry paused, then added, "Unless you're going to say we don't even have time for a trial. In which case, yeah, I guess you're just going to have to bet on me." Channing gritted his teeth. The truth was, he had already burned through his list of emergency contacts. Even the reliable veterans he knew either weren't answering or were locked into other gigs. This was the worst kind of Hollywood problem. A public screw-up under a ticking clock with no good solutions. So when some unknown kid volunteered for the job with a pretty logical testing plan, it felt less like desperation and more like destiny throwing him a rope. Channing didn't hesitate. He grabbed Henry by the arm and marched him straight to where the producer and director were still in mid-meltdown. "I've got someone," Channing announced. Both men turned, incredulous. "Who the hell is this?" the producer snapped. "He's one of the background actors. Wants to try the stunt. The stunt? The director scoffed. Is he insane? Channing held firm. He fits the lead's build. Want to do a dry run before the real take. No risk to gear or budget. Just let him show you. The producer raised a skeptical brow. Is he contracted? Does he even have a rep? Hollywood law, unwritten but enforced, was that all acting contracts went through agents or managers. No agent, no deal. Period. Channing looked to Henry. Henry gave a practiced, charming shrug. No personal agent, but I'm registered with the guild. They have in-house reps who handle freelance sign-ons like this. Everything's legit. That seemed to calm the nerves a little. The director, meanwhile, didn't care about contracts. He just wanted someone to jump from one moving car to another so he could finally blow one of them sky high and wrap the damn scene. Henry could feel the moment shift. This wasn't just a lucky break, it was a turning point. A foot in the door, through a window, via flaming car wreck. Hollywood, baby. On paper, Henry's situation wasn't that complicated. In Hollywood, most rules existed more for appearances than for enforcement. Where there's a regulation, there's a workaround. And people like Channing, grizzled veterans of the stunt business, knew every loophole. I'll sign a temporary agent contract with Henry, Channing said quickly, and then I'll handle the production side paperwork. We'll get him insured and on the books. Everything will be above board. The producer gave a disinterested nod. He didn't care who signed what as long as the paperwork covered liability and budget stayed intact. As for Channing, he wasn't investing in Henry just yet. This was a test run. If the kid pulled it off, maybe there was potential. If not, no harm done other than a few bruises. Henry, meanwhile, knew exactly where he stood, bottom of the food chain. He wasn't about to argue. Worst case scenario, he'd take a hit literally and write it off as experience. It's all resume fodder in the end. Once the signatures were done, Channing dragged Henry over to the shoot zone, where he broke down the stunt plan. See that brown sedan? Channing said, pointing to a dented, retro-looking muscle car. That's the villain's car. You're supposed to be trapped in the back seat. That's also the one we're blowing up. Henry raised an eyebrow. Channing continued, unfazed. The red convertible will be driven by the female lead. It'll line up alongside the sedan as both cars roll at about 40 miles per hour. The brown car's been rigged with a timed throttle we control its speed remotely. He pointed at two nearby trees with yellow paint on them. You jump when the first marker passes. You got to get from the window of the sedan into the back seat of the convertible. That's your landing. And the second marker? Henry asked. That's the cue for the explosion. The rig will detonate and flip the brown car, launching it up from the rear while flames shoot out. Henry blinked. That's dramatic. We've tested it with models, Channing said, as if that made it better. It'll give the director exactly what he wants. Now your safety rig. He gestured to a third vehicle, an open-frame pickup truck with camera mounts. There'll be a tensioned safety wire tethered to you. If anything goes wrong, the crew yanks it, and you get pulled up and out of the blast zone. Henry nodded slowly. In theory, the plan might work, but only if nothing went wrong, which, considering Hollywood's track record, was basically saying good luck, sucker. The wire wasn't even tensioned at the start, meaning if Henry missed the jump, mistimed the leap, or got tangled, he could get cooked, crushed, or dragged like a rag doll. The more he listened, the more Henry understood why the previous stuntman had rage quit. But all he said was, understood. The director stepped forward, stress lines etched deep across his forehead. You sure you can do this? We got one shot. No reshoots. No second takes. Henry smiled. That's all I need. The producer wasn't worried. If the shot failed, he'd just cut the scene altogether. Less footage, fewer risks, and more budget left over. No skin off his nose. Henry had no illusions. The setup was reckless and barely legal. But he had a secret weapon. He wasn't human. As a Kryptonian, Henry could survive the blast, the jump, the crash, and probably even the bad coffee on set. But the trick wasn't surviving. It was doing it believably, without exposing his powers. There's plausible human capability, and then there's bending steel with your bare hands. He had to stay within the realm of lucky stunt guy, not alien god. So he didn't suggest changes. He didn't ask for tighter safety. No one would greenlight extra gear, or more budget anyway. The producer looked like the kind of man who'd rather kill a stuntman than cut into catering. Henry went through the motions, checked the rig, inspected the cars, nodded thoughtfully, then turned to Channing. How about we do a dry run first? Channing nodded. Good call. Let's see how you move before we light the fireworks. They prepped two of the cars, neither rigged with explosives. One was the red convertible. The other, a twin of the brown sedan, had no doors, no seats, just a camera skeleton frame. The third brown car, the one loaded with explosives, sat parked a safe distance away. They'd only touch that one if Henry passed the test. Channing brought the test cars within a meter of each other, the closest safe range before the explosion radius became a problem. During the real shot, they'll be moving at speed, Channing warned. But for now, they're stationary. Just show us the mechanics. Henry asked the director, where does my sequence start? You're already halfway out the window, the director explained, gesturing dramatically. The fight scene's been shot inside. We cut to you hanging out the window, mid-escape. Then jump. Got it. Henry climbed into the sedan and positioned himself halfway through the window, legs still inside, torso dangling out. He shifted his weight, braced on the roof, bent his knees, and launched. Clean arc. Control momentum. He landed neatly in the back of the red convertible, barely shifting the upholstery. No good. The director barked immediately. Henry blinked. What? The director scowled. Too clean. Too calm. I need panic. Desperation. Like your life's on the line. I want to see you barely make it. Sweat. Fumble. Scramble. Henry raised a brow, then forced a grin. Oh, you want drama? Next take. He'd give them a show. Even with his face buried in the leather seat of the convertible, Henry could hear the director shouting in frustration. He pulled himself up from his sprawled position and hopped out of the car, expecting a critique. Sure enough, the director marched over, flailing his arms. No, not like that. You didn't leap, you just dived. I need a full flip in the air, like you barely made it, like the explosion blew you into the other car. Henry blinked. Seriously? He glanced around, catching the yep, called it expressions on the crew's faces. No wonder the previous stuntman bailed. This wasn't just dangerous, it was borderline suicidal. They wanted him to jump from a speeding car during a fiery explosion and do a flip. If he weren't a Kryptonian, Henry would have murdered this director in his mind 10 times already. But he wasn't about to pass up the chance he fought to get. So, swallowing the urge to punch someone, he mustered a pitiful, "Sure, I'll try again," expression and climbed back onto the car window. Under the director's over-the-top encouragement, Henry performed the forward flip into the convertible's back seat flawlessly. Yes, that's it. That's the one. The director hooped like a man possessed. Channing, head of the stunt team, quickly stepped in to douse the fire of enthusiasm. Hold up. Let's do a moving test first at speed, with a safety wire in place. Director, you'll want to get in the chase vehicle to monitor the framing. Oh, right. The director coughed, momentarily regaining his senses. Yeah, good idea. For the moving test, the director climbed into the chase truck's bed where a camera rig had been mounted to film the jump. Henry got fitted with a steel safety line, and the rigging crew tested it by tugging to simulate an emergency pull. The brown sedan, the villain's car, will be driven by Channing himself, while the red convertible would be steered by the female lead stunt double. No one trusted the actual actress with that level of precision driving. In fact, the woman behind the wheel now was a pro, a member of Channing's team who specialized in high-performance stunts. She could drift, spin, and parallel park at 80 miles per hour in high heels if asked. Compared to some studios that dressed up short male stuntmen in wigs to sub for female leads, Channing's crew at least tried to do things right. As for Henry, he nailed the test jump. A smooth forward flip from the moving car, landing squarely in the red convertible's back seat. Everything looked perfect except for one thing. The safety wire. Because it was slack at the beginning, it flailed unpredictably in the air. Henry had to hesitate for a moment before jumping just long enough to dodge the swinging cable and avoid getting tangled midair. Channing caught that hesitation. And while the director practically danced with joy, Channing pulled Henry aside, a hint of concern in his eyes. You hesitated, Channing said in a low voice. You good? I'm good. Henry replied with an easy smile. Channing nodded, but kept his voice serious. Listen, if you're not confident, screw the flip. Just get in the car. Director only gets one shot. Whatever ends up on film, that's what he's stuck with. Then he added, and I wouldn't mind working with you again, kid. Just don't do anything stupid out there. Don't worry, boss, Henry said, playing the part. I got this. Of course, in his mind, Henry had already decided this would not be a long-term partnership. He appreciated Channing's concern, sure, but he wasn't about to stick with a third-rate team using barely legal stunt rigs and praying nothing exploded at the wrong time. If he hadn't been superhuman, he'd never even have considered this. Still, it was nice that Channing looked out for him. Finally, the team gave the go-ahead. Henry perched on the window frame of the unmanned brown sedan, rigged to accelerate remotely. The crew cleared out. The red convertible revved beside it, and the chase truck rolled into position. 1, 2, 3, action! The most expensive shot in this entire B-movie kicked off. The brown car surged forward under automated throttle. The convertible, driven by the stuntwoman, kept perfect pace beside it. Wind blasted Henry's face. He braced himself, gripping the roof with both hands, his feet balanced on the window frame, facing outward. The first marked tree flashed past. Henry launched. At the exact moment his feet left the car, they passed the second mark. The explosion was immediate. With a boom, the back of the brown sedan launched skyward. Gasoline-fed fire whooshed into the sky, smoke and heat trailing the car as it flipped from the rear. The timing was perfect. From the director's vantage, it looked like the explosion hurled Henry clear, just as scripted. In truth, it hadn't altered his jump at all, but in the magic of movie making, it looked real. In midair, Henry tucked, twisted, and flipped forward. The convertible caught him like a stagehand catching a flying acrobat. He landed squarely in the back seat, barely rattling the suspension. It wasn't flawless, though. His pants leg caught fire. Some of the flame-retardant fuel had splashed onto his clothes, and now a small flame licked at his calf. He patted it down quickly, but by then, the scene had played out. The red car screeched to a halt as crew members ran up some with fire extinguishers to douse the still-burning brown sedan, one to blast Henry's smoldering pants leg. The stunt was complete. The director was ecstatic. His film might still be a low-budget mess, but now it had one hell of a scene in the can.